Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon, and today I'm joined by Jack because we are going to be discussing the entirety of Burning Shadows. It is going to be a combination of the Japanese sets SM2 Plus and SM3, so there's plenty of interesting and good cards to get discussing, so let's jump straight into it. Jack, do you want to just talk about the rating system that we're going to be starting off with here?
Yes, this was something that we introduced back in our last set review, and we've realised we didn't really give any context to this rating system. So this time we've got a bit of a context. In the top corner, you're going to see a score out of 5 for each of these cards, and this is kind of what it means. So there's always going to be this. If you keep this slide in the back of your mind, that's what the numbers are referring to. So 1 star is a card that's got a kind of interesting attack or ability, but probably won't see play. 2 stars is an interesting card. That could be a tech here and there if certain archetypes get popular. 3-star is where we're starting to think, okay, we should probably get some of these for the binder, but maybe because it's going to be good in the future, but maybe wouldn't fit into the format right now. 4 stars is cards that will see play pretty much as soon as they're released, going into new decks and current decks at the moment, and will have some notable impact on the metagame. And then 5 stars are usually cards that are going to be a staple in all decks, or will be their own archetype. They will bring a top-tier deck to the table on their own back. All of these ratings are based on the current format. We're recording this just after the rotation reveal. There is a little bit of consideration to rotation, but primarily this is going to be looking at where we are leading into Worlds right now.
Absolutely. So, let's get straight into it, starting with a 1-star card, the Vileplume. Now, when this was first revealed, everyone was panicking because we saw before the translation that we had a Stage 2 Vileplume with an ability. But you can all breathe a sigh of relief because its ability is not item lock. It is in fact Unpleasant Pollen. If this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, your opponent's basics Pokemon can't attack. And that is a pretty good ability in fairness. It is on a Stage 2, which is kind of awkward. And annoyingly, this has to remain active. So for it to be active, you need to be getting some sort of benefit. Maybe there are Decidueyes on your bench, or maybe you're starting to power him up to attack. For 2 grass and a colourless, down a shock does 60. You flip a coin. If heads, your opponent's active is now asleep. If tails, the opponent's active is now confused. Again, it's a kind of okay attack. The cost is annoying. 2 grass and a colourless is really pretty grim for you. It's a lot of commitment all going into one Vileplume. And I guess it's kind of cool if your opponent does have the non-basic Pokemon in their deck in the first place, they could still get trolled by some of these annoying flip cards. So there's very, very slight potential, and it's why it's on the slide, because it's got this sort of versatility. And if you're already playing Vileplume pieces, why not try like a Plume thing? Well, I'll probably tell you why. That's because it's going to be really clunky and slow. And if you're trying to set up this Vileplume, it means you're neglecting the other Vileplume in many ways. So I feel like a double Plume deck doesn't really work, and I feel like if you're going to play this as like a one-of in Plume, it's just a slot that you probably don't ever want to draw into in so many matchups. So I don't feel it's too strong. And also there's the Mew there for maybe like a Plume box deck, and this is like a one-of. It's all a bit just too janky for me, personally.
Yeah, I think there's just not enough going for this card. Whilst we have a superior Plume in the format as well. And the other thing is we're moving away from a basic, like an EX-heavy format. We're still getting basic GXs, sure. Drampa is one of the best cards out of the new set, as is Tapu Lele. But we're moving more into an evolution format. So, you know, maybe a year or 2 ago, this card would have been better than it is now. But I think right now it deserves the 1-star just because if you're playing Plume, you're playing irritating pollen rather than unpleasant pollen.
Mm-hmm. We do need to quickly note that there's the upgrading Oddish and Gloom. The Gloom can confuse, I believe, for a grass energy, and the Oddish poisons for a grass energy. So both of these are upgrades of the old ones, but something to note if you want to play the old Vileplume, but probably not going to be playing the new one.
So next up we have Tangela, very reminiscent of Trevenant EX with his bind down attack for 1 grass. There's 10 damage, and the defending Pokemon can't retreat during your next turn. Unfortunately, this is only a 1-star card, simply because it's just not quite right now. Trevenant EX was seen in Decidueye Vileplume and early Decidueye variants just in general. It was a really, really powerful attacker under item lock, but with this set, we are going to see 2 new very good supporters, Acerola and Guzma, both kind of counter this attack. So locking your opponent active is nowhere near as powerful as it used to be. the fact it's on a non-EX is really cool. Obviously, you take the hit on the HP side, but you're not giving 2 prizes up if your opponent does knock you out. But unfortunately, this card isn't going to quite have the impact we first wanted, even though it's got pretty much the identical attack to a card that has seen play in the past. Simply because like I say, we're getting 2 new cards, 2 new supporters in this set, so they're going through Vileplume as well. We're also getting Super Scoop Up if you don't have Vileplume out. So there are technically 3 new ways to be able to actually get out of this being locked active. So it's an interesting and good attack in a different format. But right now, it's unfortunate that we've seen 3 new cards that actually counter this attack.
Yeah, exactly. It's an upgrade of a card, but people now have a lot more answers. I wish Bind Down did 0 damage instead of 10, because then it like halves their outs pretty much. But yeah, unfortunately won't see play, but I thought it was worth noting because these sorts of locking retreat style attacks have seen some attention here and there. I know like there's a Rockruff Slowking deck running around, so these sorts of things are something to note, I guess.
Yeah.
Next up we have Golisopod-GX. This is a very, very highly rated card by myself and Jack. It's actually... I want to say it's my favourite, but God, he's just too good. Like, this fits my playstyle so well. The deck that we've built, I just love how it runs. Golisopod is a very early aggressive card. It's a 210 HP, stage 1 grass type. Bear in mind, Forest is still legal. And he has 3 attacks, all have made a big impression on me. I believe they're very good. The first one for a grass energy deals 30 base damage, but if the Pokemon was on your bench and became your active Pokemon this turn, you do an additional 90. So that's 120 for 1 energy. You do have the potential for Choice Band to go up to 150, and then you have things like the Sunny Day Lurantis, you have Decidueye-GX, because these are already Forest of Giant Plant compatible Pokemon. Or you can even go down the Evolutions route and go for like hitting for weakness, which is potential because it's a stage 1. So just off the first attack, people will build decks, I believe. This is where the majority of... like, this is like the leading point of the card, in my opinion, because we can use things like Super Scoop Up to do a first impression, tank a hit, scoop up. If you flip heads, you can pick it all back up, heal any damage you received, promote something else, maybe a free retreater, and then you can just put all your Golisopod pieces back down, attach your 1 energy, and just swing again. So you erase a lot of damage whilst dealing a good amount to the opponent at the same time. And again, we've already mentioned Guzma and Acerola. These 2 cards are going to be cycled so much in this video, I feel, because they're such impactful cards in the format. So these are 2 cards that, again, have great synergy with Golisopod. His other 2 attacks are also very strong. For a Grass DCE, you do Armor Press for 100, and during your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon takes 20 less damage from attacks after applying weakness and resistance. So this attack actually gets discredited a little bit, in my opinion. People just sort of move on and only see the first attack and the third attack, the GX. But I actually don't mind Armor Press. There's going to be a couple of matchups where decks can cap out at 210. Think about things like Vikavolt, Tapu Bulu. Armor Press could actually be your best friend in those sorts of matchups, because otherwise the Bulu player just pounds through 3 Golisopods and shakes your hand because they've won the game. Now you're actually making it a 2 prize war the entire time, and you can have other backup support in the deck to try and help you out. So that could be an interesting card, and of course you can hex your opponent as well. So the Armor Press is actually a pretty cute thing for fixing your HP barrier against certain matchups. And then the final attack is Crossing Cut GX for 150 damage, which is pretty cool with the Choice Band again, or any of these other grass support Pokemon. And you get to switch it with one of your bench Pokemon. Also a very cool option for you, throwing up a non-EX or just any Pokemon that can tank a hit, protecting your Golisopod once you have commit that extra double colourless onto him. So yeah, so many good things about the card. Its numbers are really nice, its early aggression is amazing, and it is filled with tons of good support. I am a huge fan of Golisopod-GX.
Yeah, definitely. And to top all of that off, we're getting a new Wimpod as well with the Wimp Out ability, meaning that on its first turn, Wimpod actually has 0 retreat cost. So it's naturally got 3, which is still really good because it's all heavy ball searchable. But just during your first turn, it means if you're going second and you start Wimpod, you can still get that turn 1 first impression, which is insane. It means like in the deck there's about probably like 6 good starters. Because all of your Wimpods are good starters, and you've got other naturally good starters anyway. So it just makes the deck so consistent. I don't think there was a game in test. I think there was 1 game in about 9 games in testing where Joe didn't hit at least 120 on turn 1 with first impression.
Yeah.
So that's like the kind of speed that this card has. And the fact it's got all these options, like we say, the evolutions, meaning that you cover so many matchups, plus, which if you don't want to go down the evolutions route, we've got about 4 lists going around at the sort of between us at the moment, whether we're playing Lurantis or Decidueye or Zoroark or evolutions. This card is so versatile. And yeah, I think, like you say, Armor Press is actually a really underrated attack. It puts you out of range of a lot of things, and sometimes that's just what you need. You need to tank that extra hit and 2-shot something, because you're still getting a 2-shot with Armor Press with a single Lurantis out on pretty much any Pokemon in the format. So, it's a really, really strong card, definitely worthy of the 4-star status. And it's a good pace setter. I think it's potentially, in my mind, I really like it paired with Decidueye. It's going to put a lot of pressure in the early game on a lot of other decks, and yeah, I'm really, really excited to see this card in the format. I think it's definitely going to make a big impression, if you'll pardon the pun.
Yeah, just again, a quick note on the Wimpod. It has a 3 retreat cost as well as the Golisopod, so it's even heavy ballable, and our list did play heavy balls just to get that turn 1 much more consistently. For me, it's the evolution package that I like the most. Simply not conceding to Volk, I think, is going to be important. And if you actually play Vaporeon, you're actually trading quite efficiently, because you're 1 energy KOing, and they're like always having to have 3 energy or going for like crazy steam up turns. So I feel you could actually be okay against Volk if you find Vaporeon quickly enough, or if they can't like Lysander it up. And again, Flareon obviously great for like Metagross, which is probably coming back because we'll talk about a card later on, and Decidueye and Mirror. So Flareon seems cool, and even Jolteon could have its uses. So that would be my favorite going forward. But Decidueye is the one that we've seen from Japan come out from the offset, so maybe that's the one other people will start with at least.
For sure. Next up, we have Charizard-GX, the second GX of the set. Unfortunately, only a 1-star, simply because I think he's slightly too slow to be insane. Starting off, 250 HP is nuts. It's the kind of thing we're going to expect on a Charizard-GX, though. For 3 colorless, we're doing 70 damage with Wing Attack. Pretty basic attack. Been slightly increased since the Charizard-EX, but still pretty just underwhelming. I think 3 for 70 is a very, very poor stat line, even at old colorless. For 3 fire and 2 colorless, Crimson Storm is, of course, doing 300 damage, and you're discarding 3 fire from this Pokemon. That's one-shotting anything, of course, but discarding 3 fire is still pretty brutal. Burning energy has never really taken off, so we're unlikely to get too much value from there, because as soon as that starts getting big, E-Hammer gets big, and we're still in a format where DCE is a huge, huge card, so it's unlikely to ever get too much value. We don't have amazing support. If you want to set up a couple, then Baby Volk is probably the best way of doing it, but you're still running a Stage 2 deck, so at that point, why aren't you playing Volk EX? So I think the most interesting part about this card is actually his GX attack, Raging Out GX, for a fire and a DCE, discarding the top 10 cards of your opponent's deck. This could actually be really relevant. If you think just in testing, every now and again, just look at your deck size, because I think if you then take 10 cards away from your deck just randomly at some point throughout the game after turn 3 or 4, that's actually going to be really significant. There's only a couple of things that can deal with that have enough recovery to be able to take this Raging Out GX and still not lose the game. The issue is you can only do it once, and it's on a Stage 2. We do have, obviously, the kind of Houndoom box style mill deck from the past, so that there is natural fire support anyway, but I think it's just too slow. It's still a Stage 2. Houndoom wasn't like it was a deck that didn't have a lot of space, because you ran all of these sort of quirky and annoying supporters and stuff, but if you're taking all of that stuff out just to fit in this Charizard-GX, enough for it to be consistent, then at that point Houndoom probably isn't good enough on his own anymore. So it just doesn't quite all fit together too well in my mind, as it's a Stage 2. We do obviously have Ho-Oh and Kiawe from this set. Kiawe setting you up for Crimson Storms if you're going down that route, or I guess Raging Out, but you're technically wasting an energy if you're Kiaweing your Charizard. And then Ho-Oh is, unfortunately, if you're using Ho-Oh to get him out, you can't then Raging Out GX, so that means you're limited to Wing Attack and Crimson Storm. And again, I don't think these attacks are too impactful for you to be playing a Ho-Oh style deck and running the Charizard-GX in that deck.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's not a good enough attacker, therefore the GX attack is the only thing of note in my opinion. I'd quite like to see a Sylveon deck play it, just playing like a 1/1/1/1 fire energy like in there, because you can sort of ribbon it out over a few turns as you just evolve up turn by turn. That would be like so hilarious to see. But then again, Sylveon's Plea is also like a really important GX attack in a lot of matchups. But I like what you say about the 10 card mill. Even if you're not winning the game flat out on that turn, 10 cards is crazy for resource management on the opponent's side. They lose a lot of energy, they can lose Super Rods, VS Seekers that they need for like Lysanders later on, or just Guzmas to move out of things that you're trying to switch out, trying to force them into stall. So, like, oh, it's just so good. 10 cards is such a big deal to get rid of when anyone needs to be careful with resources, and some decks won't be able to handle that. I kind of like the idea of playing like Oricorio, Houndoom, 2/2/2 Charizard line that you try and set up slowly. But again, it's just, as you say, it's clunky, it's janky. People can target Charmanders, Charmeleons if they're super scared about them and pick off free prizes. So, yeah, probably won't ever see play. One for the collectors, I imagine. Next up, we have Ho-Oh-GX. This is actually a 2-star rated card from us. A little bit more potential than the Charizard, we feel. It has 3 attacks. The first is Sacred Fire for a fire and DCE. You are able to do 50 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. That's anywhere on the board, which is pretty decent. For 3 fire and a colorless, we have Phoenix Burn, which is 180, and this Pokemon can't use Phoenix Burn during your next turn. And it also has a really intriguing GX attack. For a fire and 2 colorless, Eternal Light GX, put 3 in any combination of fire Pokemon GX or EX from your discard pile onto your bench directly. So that means we can get evolved GX Pokemon or even Mega Evolutions. As you can see on the left side of your screen, here are pretty much the main partners that we can think of right now. We don't have too many good choices, and this is kind of why Ho-Oh is one of the lower rated cards we have. There is potential for the future with his GX attack, if ever we get a very, very playable Evolution GX Pokemon. Ho-Oh instantly raises in its value. But yeah, right now I think like maybe you're building Incineroar or something like that, and it doesn't sound fantastic for you. So yeah, I feel it's a lot of work just to put in to then set up something to cheat through evolutions. Right now, evolving Pokemon isn't too difficult when we have things like Alolan Vulpix anyway, so like wasting a GX attack, putting 3 energy on a Pokemon that's likely going to get knocked out after you use this, going down 2 prizes just to then have your stage 2s, is it all worth it? And I have to evaluate at the moment, no, unless we have a crazy bonkers GX Pokemon in the future. A couple other quick notes. It has 190 HP, so it's actually like out of range of a couple of extra things, which is one thing I know a few players are happy about. And at the same time, it doesn't have water weakness. It in fact has a lightning weakness. So there's some people saying it could be teched into Volcanion decks as like a one-of. I personally don't see it. I think Phoenix Burn, it's just an extra energy. And a lot of the time when you play Turtonator, you do go for the 4 energy, so you can try and chain its attack twice. But I feel that Turtonator has so many better other potential because of its GX attack and because of Shell Trap. These outweigh what Phoenix Burn can give you in comparison. So I personally don't see this taking a slot in many Volcanion decks, and that's why it's rated so low.
Yeah, I think it's one for the binder for now. Eternal Light will always have potential, but it just needs a staged 1 or 2 GX to break it, really, I think. And right now, whilst it's got that potential, and Phoenix Burn is definitely not anything to sleep on, I think unfortunately it's not quite good enough for the format that it's going into. But that being said, like it's going to create some, I think, really interesting decks, even if they're not super competitive. We're going to see some crazy lists with this card, I expect. And then expanded with things like Battle Compressor and stuff, this probably has a bit more potential, just because you're gonna have a more consistent engine getting these fire Pokemon into your discard as well. So definitely one I would probably suggest picking 1 or 2 of up. But I don't think it's going into the format it's going to have too much of an impact. Next up, we have Salazzle-GX, another 2-star card. Salazzle is the third fire GX that we're getting in this set. This is from Sun and Moon Plus, Sun and Moon 2 Plus. Really, really interesting card. Stage 1, 200 HP, fire type. Got 3 attacks, all for 2 fire energy. This isn't too difficult to achieve with things like Baby Volt and that kind of thing. So we've got 3 attacks. Devilish Claw does 50 times the number of prize cards you've taken. So it's a really, really interesting attack that's actually going to get better towards the late game. You're going to start maybe with your Baby Volks doing sort of poking and taking maybe 1 or 2 prizes just through weakness or slightly underwhelming attacks. But then you're going to be setting up a couple of Salazzle-GXs to then Devilish Claw your way through the rest of the game. We've had a little table to see what kind of damage we can be doing. If we're taking 3 prizes, the base damage is 50, 4 is base damage is 200, and 5 is 250. We've got Band on top of that to push those into 180, 230, and 280. 180 and 230 are really relevant numbers, so it's definitely useful to know that we can hit 180 pretty easily with a combination of either Band or the other Salazzle. Having the Hot Poison ability poisons and burns your opponent's active Pokemon. So the way Burn works now, that means it's a guaranteed plus 30 as well. So that means actually with 3 prizes, you can be doing 210 as well. So it's definitely a card that has a lot of power behind it, but unfortunately there are still quite a few pieces needed to be able to get this Devilish Claw into one-shot range. You still need to have taken 3 prizes initially. So, you know, it's good, but it needs an early game sort of attacker to deal with this, or to get it to the point where it's actually going to be swinging for big damage. Second attack is pretty simple. Heat Blast for 2 energy, does 110 damage. That's really, really efficient. And especially when you consider we have Band plus Hot Poison, that's 2 energy for 170. That's knocking out Lele's. That's really, really relevant. So maybe you don't even need the Baby Volk. Maybe you can just ramp into this relatively quickly and take your first couple of prizes through Heat Blast anyway. And then finally, the GX attack, Queen Haze-GX. Discard all energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. Very, very reminiscent to Umbreon. Umbreon obviously letting you discard 2 from the board. This letting you discard more if your opponent has more than 2. However, I don't think it's too much better. I think a lot of the time your opponent is going to have 2 on the active anyway, maybe no more. Because it's going to be often basic energy or rainbow or whatever, plus DCE. There's a lot of DCE attackers right now. So a lot of the time it's going to be a slightly underwhelming Dark Call GX. But that being said, sometimes you're going to be able to hit 3 or 4 energy. You're going to be able to hit a Lele that's just been stacking energy to try and deal with you or whatever. And you're going to be able to wipe all of their energy off the board. So it's definitely got some pros and some cons compared to Umbreon-GX. Devilish Claw, I think, is a really, really interesting attack. And if we can find a partner that can deal with the early game well enough to get you to that point where we've taken 3 prizes, I think setting up 2 Salazzles can often just secure you the game, because you're going to take 2 prizes with your first one, and you're guaranteed another 2 prizes with your second one simply because of how much damage you're doing. So, you know, it's a really, really strong attacker, and paired with the right early game Pokemon, I think this could actually see some play. Of course, one of the biggest downsides is the fact that we still have Volk in format, and Volk, I think, is still probably a more consistent fire deck, especially as you also have weakness on Salazzle. So you're going to be losing the Fire Mirror anyway. So unfortunately, I think this card is pushed out of the format slightly by Volk. But that being said, it's definitely one to keep in the back of your mind, because Devilish Claw has a lot of potential behind it.
Yeah, I agree. You hit the nail on the head with the early game. It's just sort of, there's nothing obvious that you're like, oh, I can do this in the early game to take my first 3 prizes. Because once you've taken your first 3, you know, you just ride Salazzle to finish the game. And 200 HP is a decent enough barrier that you can hope to get 2 attacks off to, like, close the game. And if not, as you say, there's nothing wrong with trying to set up 2 to, like, guarantee it. And it's cool that you can have that Hot Poison support for you as well. Burn and Poison is really annoying, and you can spam it now that we have things like Scoop Up as well. Scoop Up doesn't synergize too well with Salazzle because all of its energy is a 2 cost, but maybe like your other attacker or just for retreat option that you could be playing it to recycle Hot Poison, or you can just play Devo Spray, of course. So figuring out the early game could be the issue for this card. I do have to note, I think Salazzle may not be main set. I believe it could be a box promo, but I threw it in here because it's a card worth discussing, and we don't do individual videos where we can talk about all these box promos, so I thought we may as well discuss it because it's a really interesting one. I think actually the Alolan Raticate might be a good bet for your early game pressure.
Yeah.
Because you just manually attach bench while you can be doing active damage. You'll already be playing lots of bans, and you can play Hot Poison as well, so maybe that's the route people go down. I literally came up with that on the fly. That's why it's not on the slides, but that's what you get for listening and not just clicking through slide by slide. Okay. Let's move on to Gyarados. This is, in my opinion, a pretty low-rated card.
So sad.
Yeah, I've heard a few people murmur about it being a tech card in Gyarados, maybe a tech in Vespiquen. Obviously, right now, there's the potential for Archies, so that we can deal 200 damage for a DCU, which sounds good, but Archies is not consistent enough, and post-rotation it goes, so I don't think there'll ever be a point where you're going to Archie this guy out, and it's not worth Archieing him in Expanded either. His attack is Carper. For 2 colorless energy, you deal 50 times the amount of Magikarp in your discard pile. This sounds, in theory, okay, right? It doesn't sound terrible. But when you start thinking through your game plan, if you actually want to make a Gyarados deck, first of all, you need to find a way to discard your Carps. It's not actually easy to discard things in this format. We only have, like, Ultra Balls and Sycamores, basically. And then there's, like, Acrobike, which is a chance of hitting a Magikarp, and then you're, like, super happy with yourself. But you can only play 4 copies, and even when you play these 4 copies, you need to evolve up this Gyarados. So that's 1 Magikarp guaranteed gone. And if this gets knocked out, what are you going to do the following turn? Well, oh, damn, I mean, I'd probably have to have another Magikarp on my bench. So now you're doing a DC for 50 if you put 2 Magikarps in your discard pile and if you haven't prized any. So, yeah, I think that tells you just how bad this card is. Even with Band, it's not great. For me, personally, I feel it doesn't pair with Vespiquen because you can just play Evolutions anyway and have more type coverages than just water type coverage. And it doesn't pair with the other Gyarados, even in my opinion. I've heard people are saying, like, oh, you protect yourself from spread damage decks a little bit, but I really just don't see it. It's such a stretch for this card to be played in, even as a one-of in the deck. I know most Gyarados players only play 3 copies of Gyarados, so there's the open slot in terms of, like, physically having a Gyarados, but the deck is tight, and especially when you have to shove in Machoke, like, guaranteed, I don't see that slot being dedicated to this card, because it doesn't outweigh something like a Rescue Stretcher or any consistency card, so I don't think this should see any play.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because it's so reminiscent of Stormfront Gyarados, but it's just not the right format for it. Stormfront Gyarados had a lot more going for it. It had BTS, it was a free attacker, it had rescue energy, and this just doesn't have any of that support. So unfortunately, as reminiscent as it is, this Gyarados isn't going to see too much play, I don't think. Next up, we have the sort of basic or the non-GX Alolan Ninetales, which we've rated 3-star. It's got Light Barrier, which is essentially safeguard for GXs and Pokemon EXs. Prevent all effects of attacks, including damage done to this Pokemon, by your opponent's GX and EX Pokemon. That's a really, really interesting ability, and it's we haven't seen a safeguard style effect in pretty much all of last format, so it's nearly been 2 years since we've seen this kind of effect, I think. Whilst we've got Hex, it's still not fantastic, just because your opponent will always have Hex or outs to Hex to be able to deal with you. But I think when Hex goes, this is actually a really, really important ability to have. I think it easily finds its way into the Alolan Ninetales deck as a one-of, just because there's going to be certain decks that just can't deal with this. Like, there's going to be decks that don't have a particularly good answer to be able to find Hex and do enough to keep up and prevent you sort of finding another Alolan Ninetales. So yeah, it's a decent ability to have, and it's just going to be another resource for the Alolan Ninetales deck to have. And then his attack for Water DC just does 80 damage. It's actually not even anything to sniff at, really. With a Band, that's 110. That's knocking out a Shaman. That's knocking out a Volk for weakness on a non-EX, which is actually really important for prize trade. So you know, it's not at all a bad attack. It's definitely worth noting. There's not too much to sort of talk about with this card. It's kind of one you may initially gloss over, but yeah, it's just going to be a nice resource for the Alolan Ninetales deck to have in certain matchups. It's going to make things a little bit more awkward for your opponent.
Yeah, I think you're right. It becomes like an instant one-of in the Alolan Ninetales deck, which we've seen, you know, has done one well quite recently, so that's why it's like a 3-star, and correct as well that Hexmaniac, when that goes, this card could even become a quad non-GX build, or you'd play like just one GX Ninetales to finish off the game, and you become like the new Pyro style deck, and much better than Pyro ever was because you have Beacon to fall back on as well, so you're much more consistent than previously. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, Pyro saw play just because you could win rounds because you counter people, right? And maybe this card ends up doing that. We have so much better support for Ninetales as well because you have Aqua Patch, so you can attack every single turn unlike the Pyro used to. So for me, it's definitely a very good and scary card and like an annoying card for the format as well. So maybe we'll eventually be seeing a quad non-GX Ninetales build. For now, though, it probably just becomes the one slot to maybe buy you a turn here and there. Once you've used your Ice Path GX on the GX, then you start building up Blizzard Ed on the bench to finish off big prizes while you're sort of Aurora Beaming the active, just putting pressure on whilst you're building up on the bench. So yeah, really cool one-off for now.
I like that it's also on a stage 1 as well. Unfortunately, since we've seen Shining Legends, it's kind of irrelevant that it's on a stage 1. But before, like a week or so ago, I thought it was really cool that it was on a stage 1 because it meant that we weren't going to have these crazy quad safeguard decks. But hey, Hooper had to go and ruin that.
But yeah, this can attack a lot better than Hooper, so it's not like a strafe deck, it's a different deck.
Has a much better attack. So yeah, I think it's a really, really cool card.
For sure. Right, on to Kingdra, and sorry Jack, I'm going to have to slag off your boy. It is a 140 HP stage 2. Both of its attacks are for a single water energy, the first of which is Brine, which deals 90 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon that has any damage counters already on it. We do have to note that the Horsey and Seadra also have sniping effect attacks. I believe Horsey is 10 anywhere and the Seadra is 30 anywhere for both 1 energy, so it's not too difficult to activate this effect. We do have things like Po-Town, we have Magma Base, even things like a Tapu Koko in the early turns. You can get damage on Pokemon quite easy in the early turns, so activating this 90 damage shouldn't be an issue for you ever. And 1 for 90 anywhere is kind of okay, right? I feel like it's a good snipe, but 90 isn't the number it used to be, in my opinion. Now that we're seeing 250, 230 HP Pokemon, when we have Acerola in format, when we have Super Scoop Up in format, it makes me skeptical that 90 is enough, and Choice Band can only improve your active damage as well, so it's all a bit iffy for me. And for the similar reason why I don't like Brine, I kind of don't like Tornado Shot. For a water energy, you do 90, discard a water attached to this Pokemon, and then you do 30 to one of your opponent's bench. The discard could actually be beneficial with a few decks that are coming out in the format, and also helping you just like against Lele's in general, but if someone's attacking a Lele into a Kingdra, you have actually probably won the game. But yeah, 90-30, it's a Night Spear for 1 energy, so how can this not be good, right? Well, it's because it's a stage 2 and it's weak to grass. And there's Golisopod, there's Decidueye, there's Vespiquen, even Vikavolt Tapu Bulu. Like, there's a lot of grass in the format right now. So it's a terrible weakness to have, so you can't tank hits against a lot of decks. 140 is not even tanky anymore compared to, like, the sort of HPs we've been seeing. We only keep Dive Ball for so long as well, that's going to be going, so the deck only ever gets worse in my opinion. We do have water support, but the question I just have to ask is, if you're playing Kingdra, why aren't you just playing Greninja? Because Greninja is got the same weaknesses as this deck, but can ramp up 230 damage in a turn, and even more now that we have Guzma, so, like, just play Greninja instead, please, people.
Yeah, Kingdra's a Pokemon that I always forget about until I see it, and I'm like, oh my god, this is one of my favourite Pokemon. And it's always got such interesting attacks. Like, it's always got these 1 energy attacks that do insane damage, but it's just not insane anymore. Obviously a 1 for 90 snipe anywhere, which is conditional, but technically, like, if you get 1 Tapu Koko off, it's unconditional, is insane. But the problem is, like we say, Acerola plus 250 HP Mons nowadays, it's just not as impactful as it was back in, like, the Diamond and Pearl days. So yeah, it's just not quite good enough. I think it's, like you say, it's just a worse Greninja. Greninja may have these inherent sort of rough weaknesses that it just naturally slips up on. But if you can set up both of these decks, I think Greninja is the better deck to be playing. So yeah, just play Greninja if you want to play a stage 2 water type. In my opinion, it's got inherently the same strengths as Kingdra. It's got the same weaknesses as Kingdra, but it has a lot more strengths. Next up, we have Tapu Fini-GX, a 2-star card. I think this is one of my. It's not like one of my favorite cards of the set, but I think it's a really, really interesting card. And a card that I feel people haven't really been talking about, maybe because it's only a 2-star, but just in general, I think it's actually going to be a really, really resourceful card for the Aqua Box deck. 170 HP. Obviously, it's a Tapu, so it's got no weakness, which actually is really cool. And 1 retreat is obviously super nice. Even though we've got Manaphy, Garbodor is still about, so just having that natural 1 retreat is really cool. First attack, Aqua Ring, does 20 damage for a colorless, and you can switch to the bench. That's pretty cool. It means that something else can get hit, and you can also sort of bomb back to the bench to get value from Aqua Patch next turn. Hydro Shot is Tapu Fini's second attack for 2 water and a colorless. You discard 2 water, and the attack does 120 to one of your opponent's Pokemon. And that's knocking out a Shaman. This is the first snipe we've seen in quite a while that actually knocks out a Shaman. Obviously, Shaman is seeing less and less support, or less and less play nowadays. But there are still decks that kind of have to run some. Things like Ray and Guardy will always run a fair amount, plus things like Decidueye will still be running 1 or 2. So this is a really, really nice attack to have, I think, in the Aqua Box deck. Just having that snipe to be able to deal with something on the bench just to finish it off if your opponent hasn't been able to Acerola it out. And then his GX attack, Tapu Storm-GX, for a grass energy, for a water energy, does a really interesting effect, actually. Shuffle your opponent's active Pokemon, and all cards attach them back into their deck, provided they have at least 1 benched Pokemon on the bench. Again, it's just a nice option to have in the Aqua Box deck. I don't think this card is insane, but I just like its sort of versatility as a one-of in Aqua Box. You now have a sniping attack and a strafe attack and a really, really cool GX attack that, even though your opponent has to have a Pokemon on the bench, meaning that you don't insta-win the game, that you can still insta-win the game from this attack, because if they're down to their last attacker or whatever, and they've just got a Lele or a support Pokemon on the bench, you can actually just completely reset them. And the fact that it's for 1 energy as well means that you can actually just drop this in a turn. So, Tapu Fini has a lot of versatility to it. I think it's immediately a one-of in Aqua Box. But I don't see it go. I don't think the card is strong enough itself to go any further than that. I don't think we're going to be seeing a heavy Tapu Fini style deck. Hydro Shot, whilst being a 120 snipe, in my opinion, which is pretty cool, given that what we've just said about Kingdra and the fact that we've got Acerola and Scoop Up in format now. If you're doing 120 and not knocking them out, your opponent will have access to Acerola if they want to use it. They won't necessarily always want to use it, but they will have the option to do so. So I don't think we'll ever see a quad Tapu Fini deck whilst it's in the same set as Acerola. But I think it's a very, very nice option for Aqua Box to have.
I agree. It's a really, really cool option. I love the GX attack. I think it's very good, especially because Lapras's GX attack becomes inherently worse. Status conditions get worse in this format because of Guzma and Acerola. So people naturally have a lot more outs to paralysis. Well, now you get to replace your GX attack with this Tapu Storm option for just 1 energy as well. So you can do this really early game. That's what I like. I think shoving the Fini active, going for Tapu Storm after your opponent has commit their first energy attachment, even just 1 energy attachment can sometimes be value for you because you're shuffling their entire attacker back into their deck, and they may not have backup support, and you can just be patching to your Lapras for the following turn and come in and swing on their next attacker. And it's like they have to set up 3 attackers all in 2 turns, and that's really difficult for decks. So I like the tempo that you can gain from Tapu Storm. As you said, Jack, you can end Tapu Storm, they lose all their Pokemon, and it's like, oh no, it's late game and I've got nothing left. I have a 1-card hand, how am I meant to respond in the next few turns? So yeah, the GX attack is really, really strong. That's my favourite part about this card for certain. The other 2 things, yeah, the Aqua Ring, we're not going to see a strafe attacking deck, I don't think, right now. Wobbuffet is good in the format, but not good enough, and Tauros is too low HP right now. It's weird to say that 180 is not enough, but 180 is not enough in this format. So yeah, it doesn't do enough damage, and the Hydro Shot, I like it as an option. Lapras can get a lot of 1-hits with the 190, but sometimes you can finish things off. Or, as you say, pick off a Shaman if people are still playing that. So yeah, the GX attack I'm in love with. I think there's huge potential here. Huge potential in a lot of different points in the game. And that's why it will see play. But I agree that it is only strictly in these sort of Aqua Patch style decks. I don't even think it goes into the Ninetales because you want to Ice Path, but potentially in Ninetales just for the sniping, because you're doing 50 snipes on other things, then you can Hydro Shot, so who knows, but in general, I want to start testing Fini. It may be one of the more underrated cards from us, once we start seeing it in play, because I believe this GX attack is very impactful and swingy tempo-wise, and played at the right time, this could be incredible for you.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Raichu. Raichu has the Evo Shock ability. Once during a turn, when you play this card from your hand to evolve, you may use its ability, and the opponent's active is now paralyzed. So it's like the Servine that we had, but no coin flip anymore. Guaranteed paralysis. There's been times when guaranteed paralysis has formed decks that have won tournaments and been incredible. Just look at like Vanillux, Vileplume, Victini, these sorts of things where guaranteed paralysis is crazy and it's so strong. Excelgor, yeah, exactly. But not this format. Because this format has Scoop Up, Guzma, Acerola, switches, ropes, everything everywhere. People can get out of paralysis quite easily. And this is an issue for Raichu because I believe he would only ever be a tech card in other Raichu archetypes, where you're already playing things like Raichu. Well, you're already playing Pikachus and Raichus, right? So he becomes like a 1 or 2 of in the deck. Potentially like Raichu Bats, where you're already playing either Scoop Ups yourself or Devo Sprays, when you're trying to recycle Sneaky Bites, or you have the option to recycle Evo Shock. Unfortunately, I think Paralysis is devalued so much, in my opinion. It's probably good late game, but Raichu is best when it's taking one-hit knockouts with an 8 bench and a choice band, so the paralysis a lot of times won't even help you. It can help you stabilize a dodgy early game if you're just not drawing well, but that's not even that good for you. Like, if you're not drawing well, maybe it's because you've drawn this Raichu and not your other Raichu that you can attack with, you know what I mean? Actually, one of the biggest reasons why I think this card won't succeed is because it's not very searchable. It's got 110 HP instead of 90, so you can't like level ball him out, so if he's going to be like a 1 or 2 of niche card, you can't find him. And that's really awkward for the turns that you need him, other than like teammates, I guess. But again, if you're teammatesing, you should be able to manipulate your way into a KO if you're using the Raichu deck. And for like other archetypes, I don't see Raichu being good enough either. I've heard a few people say like, I'm going to play this plus Raichu, this plus Raichu. And I'm just like, oh man, I devalue Paralysis so much now because of the new supporters that we've got in the set. And for that reason, I feel Raichu may be experimented with, but won't see much play.
Yeah, I think this is one that if you pick up, probably hold on to, because Raichu-GX is a card that we've seen revealed that could increase his card's value a little bit, but right now, like you say, it's not searchable, so you can't hit it on the turns you need it. And if you can, like you say, teammates, you should be manipulating your way into rebalancing the prize trade anyway. So it's just a relatively, given how impactful the ability is, it's a relatively low impact card in the deck it's in.
Yeah.
So maybe if this card was a different Pokemon, it would be slightly different, maybe slightly better, but the fact that it's a Raichu and it's not searchable, and we have these new supporters, it's just not the right time for Evo Shock to be particularly impactful. Next up we have Seviper, with its Poison Up ability, or More Poison in English, because it puts 1 more damage counter on your opponent's poisoned Pokemon between turns. This is basically in here simply because in Expanded, with Verbank, City, and Hypnotoxic Laser and Seismitoad, this can actually get up some pretty crazy damage, especially given that Toad has Choice Band now. Choice Band plus Laser plus Verbank plus like 2 Sevipers is pretty much 2-shotting everything, which is insane. We have it like regarding Standard, we have Salazzle, Ariados, and Poison Barb right now. None of these cards are seeing play, so standard-wise, this card isn't very good, I don't think. But there has been a lot of talk about Seismitoad being paired with this Seviper in multiple cases. So I think that's why it's got its 2nd star from us. Simply because even though over in Europe, at least this year, we haven't had any expanded tournaments, it wouldn't surprise me if people start taking 1 or 2 of these into their Seismitoad lists, if not more, just to be able to keep up with the ever-increasing HB of these GXs. being able to item lock plus now potentially force 2 shots is really, really important.
Yeah, it's a really gross card, and what I like is you can fix math so that you can manipulate poison to get knocked out going into your turn, so they have to promote a new Pokemon as well. So people can be trying to like pass turns in the active and feel safe, and then you're like, haha, there's my third Seviper. You actually get knocked out this turn, son. And it's like, oh dear, that's really bad. Well, sorry, getting knocked out back into your turn, you know what I mean? So, yeah, I just think it's going to be an obvious combo with Verbank Laser, but there's no deck right now that I'm seeing that I want to put Seviper in immediately. We're not going to start playing Poison Barb over Choice Band, even though you can like get 40 a turn if you play Poison Barb for Seviper on your bench, because that's ridiculous, and Field Blower's around, and you can't play a deck when you're putting 4 Sevipers on your bench. So, yeah, good for Expanded, but not so much Standard right now. Next up, we have Dusknoir. This is an interesting card. First of all, the Duskull has a attack for a Psychic Energy, Dark Guide, put a basic Pokemon from your discard pile onto your bench. This is handy if you want to try and like spam multiple Duskulls, or if you just like done an Ultra Ball, got rid of a basic Pokemon, and then you just Dark Guide it back onto the board, so you sort of like half the cost of your Ultra Ball, or make those discards a little less expensive. Then again, you could just put it down on the board at the same time, so it's kind of meh, but just a little option that we thought was worth noting. And then onto the Dusknoir itself. It's a 150 HP Stage 2 Pokemon that has the very interesting ability Dark Invitation. Once during a turn, you may have your opponent reveal their hand, which is already very good. And then, if there's a basic Pokemon you find, you can put it onto their bench and place 3 damage counters onto that Pokemon. So, forcing resources out of the opponent's hand is quite good for you. Especially because if it's in their hand, they didn't want to play it that turn. So if it's these sorts of things, it's probably things like Tapu Lele's, Shaymin-EX's, or just awkward high HP, high retreat cost annoying Pokemon that don't help them in the matchup. These sorts of things that you're just like, yep, get on with your bench, because why not? This could help me later on. And you get an extra 3 counters as well. 3 damage counters can help out a couple of decks. It can help out things like Honchkrows, Ravenclaw, can help out spread decks for things like Flying Flip, and of course forcing an extra Pokemon onto the board can really help out these Mind Jack attacks from Zoroark, but also it is synergistic with himself because he too has the Mind Jack attack. Unfortunately, it's not just a DCE cost, there's also a little Psychic Energy that you got to slap on him, but it does 30 damage for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon, but instead of the plus 10 that Zoroark has, it has a plus 30 base damage. Unfortunately, the trade-off for an extra 20 damage base is not fair for the extra attack cost. The extra Psychic Energy is just very inefficient for you, and you're a stage 2 on top of the fact. So it's really awkward. The ability is really cool, and I want to see it get played, and I want it to work. But it has to be a really specific deck in order to make it work. And currently I think that specific deck is not out there for us, and he's too slow as an attacker, too much commitment, again, for something that's relatively frail. And yeah, that's my thoughts, really.
Yeah, it's another cool Dusknoir, but one that's probably going to stay in the binder until we see some kind of deck that can really, really abuse Dark Invitation. Dusknoir always gets cool cards, so they're always worth picking up, I think, just because I think there's very minimal Dusknoirs that I haven't seen play. I think one of the only ones was the latest one that didn't see any play at all. Dusknoir always gets really, really interesting cards. So unfortunately, right now it's a 1-star. But you know, like Joe says, if they're holding a basic Pokemon that they don't want to bench, maybe to Sycamore away, or like you say, to get value out of Lele or Shaymin next turn, it's going to be pretty annoying for them. Filling their bench as well can be really, really annoying. So it's definitely a really cool ability, but unfortunately not quite right for this format. Next up, we have Necrozma-GX, one of the front runners with Ho-Oh, one of the sort of staple Pokemon from this set. Really, really interesting Pokemon. Has an ability Light's End, preventing all damage done to this Pokemon by colorless Pokemon. So as you can see, Drampa, Mega Ray, these guys are going to be doing nothing to this without a Hex. Obviously, if they can Hex, they can both one-shot this guy. But forcing a Hex out is still going to be annoying somewhat. It's a bit easier now we have Tapu Lele. so the ability isn't as crazy. But also, once we see Hex Rotate, it's going to mean that we have to find Garb to be able to get around this Necrozma's ability. So it could be an interesting tech in some decks, but that's not really what we're going to be looking at the card for. The main thing is the GX attack, but it's just worth mentioning the Prismatic Burst attack for 10 damage and 3 colorless energy. If you discard all of your Psychic energy from this Pokemon, and it does 60 more damage for each Psychic discarded this way. So you can be doing 190 for 3 energy, which is 220 for Choice Band with Choice Band, which is a fairly decent number. With Kukui, that's 240. That's knocking out everything but 250 HP Mons. But the biggest issue here is once you've done this Prismatic Burst, how do you then reload? It's kind of hard to set up a second Necrozma. You kind of have to set up one and then start committing to the bench, simply because I think Max Elixir is the best way we have to start setting up these Necrozma-GXs. It's definitely an interesting attack to have, and it will get you a one-shot if you do have 3 energy a lot of the time. Considering naturally you one-shot a Lele, so it's always going to be a Lysander away from getting a one-shot. But I don't think it's ever going to be a main attacker, simply because you can't reload this Prismatic Burst very efficiently at all. Next up we have Darkrai-GX, a really, really interesting GX attack. Does 100 damage to each of the opponent's Pokemon GX and EX. So doing 100 to EXs is kind of irrelevant, because they're all going to be they're all going to be in 2-shot range of that. But being able to do 100 to each of your opponent's GXs, is really, really good. As you can see, we've listed 4 GXs here. Golisopod-GX, Metagross, and Decidueye all have stage 1s and 2s, or basics that have less than 100 HP. So pair that with a Miraculous Shine, and you can be taking 3 prizes on the next turn, and taking out, more importantly, all of your opponent's stage 2s, which is insane. It's really, really good. So I think that's going to be where we see this card played, if anything. I think me and Joe are kind of theorizing a real spread type deck, with Darkrai-GX being one of the big attacks. You want to go for that once you want to let your opponent set up, just doing things like Coco in the early turns, taking some cheeky prizes here and there, and then Darkrai-GX into Miraculous Shine for a big pair of swing turns that can actually win you a game from behind, take multiple prizes, and deal with your opponent's board all at the same time. So that's kind of where Necrozma is right now. I don't think Prismatic Burst has enough reload to warrant a Necrozma deck. And I don't think Light's End is good enough for it to be the splashable answer to Drampa or Mega Ray, because it's one... Mega Ray is a much better counter for Mega Ray's Sudowoodo, and Drampa has, a lot of the time, is naturally running Ability Lock anyway, so Light's End is going to be turned off half the time anyway. So it's never going to be splashed for the ability, I don't feel. Prismatic Burst doesn't have enough reload, but this Darkrai-GX could mean that this card could still see some play, and could be a fairly interesting counter, considering it's a colorless cost, if you're naturally having trouble with some of these stage 2 GX decks anyway.
Yeah, Necrozma is actually a card that I really want to start testing in play. As you say, I think the ability is just a little bonus that can help you in early turns. It means that you can't get Righteous Edged for damage, at least. They just sort of waste... Well, I mean, they probably still do it for you. That's annoying. Okay. But, yeah, it's just a little ability that... Why not? It's something extra, right? The Prismatic Burst, yeah, there's Elixirs. There's also Metagross-GX, but I feel if you're going for this sort of set up a basic with a stage 2 in the support role, I think you play Vikabulu instead, because you only need 1 Vikabolt to be set up. Whereas if you're playing Necrozma Metagross, you need to play and get out multiple Metagross in order to do it every turn. The flip side is Metagross is also quite a good attacker. Maybe Necrozma becomes like a 1 count in a Metagross-GX deck, but if you're doing that, it means your energy split becomes a lot more awkward, because you need to probably play like 4-5 Psychics, and currently it only plays like 1 or 2 for the Tapu Cure, so probably not going to go in Metagross is my assumption. It feels like a worse Vikabulu. But yeah, it's the Darkrai-GX that I want to toy with because of those Evolution GX Pokemon on the right side of the screen. I feel this could even be the saving grace for something like Drampa Garb itself, when you just choose to play 1 Necrozma, 1 Espeon, and those archetypes that you think that you should lose to. You should lose to things like Mega Guardi. I think also it has a very bad Golisopod because 210 that gets healed every turn with like Acerolas and stuff, as long as they don't go over the threshold for Gardevoir, is going to be really bad for you. So instead, you're just going to go for like a Darkrai-GX attack and spread on multiple and devolve them all at once, even improving your Decidueye, which is really cool. If you have just that getting set up and getting, I think, probably need to hit 2 targets to be hugely effective, and that's really not much to ask for. Decidueye will often have more than 2 out. Metagross will also have more than 2 out. Golisopod and Guardi, 2 is probably like as high as it gets on one board at once, really, from my testing, because they normally get out Gallade as one of their options if they're the Guardi deck, and because Golisopod can cycle so often, they only need to have a couple out. But if you ever hit more than 2 targets, I feel you've won the game with these 2 attacks. You Black Ray, you Espeon, you shake their hand because you've wiped out their entire board. If you hit 2 targets, I believe it's a big enough swing in some decks to be worth it, and Drampa feels like a deck that can play this because it's all colourless. The combo of both Pokemon is all colourless, so it feels like it needs to be a 2-card combo that will be in some decks just to answer these sorts of bad matchups. So if you're really struggling with any of the 4 archetypes on the right, think about this combo and maybe just try it out in your list, see how clunky these 2 basic cards will be. Maybe this comes to nothing, maybe we never see a Black Ray GX attack in tournament play, but it's one that I'm definitely going to experiment with. One of the cards that I actually really want to experiment this with, as you saw on the last slide, is the Tapu Lele. This is also a 2-star card because, again, I feel it's only really how good Necrozma is will dictate how good this Tapu Lele is. The Tapu Lele has 2 attacks. The first is for a basic Psychic. You deal 20 times the amount of energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon, so it's actually not too shabby. And it's the second attack, Magical Swap, which is the most interesting. For a Psychic Colorless, you are able to move the damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way that you like. Very, very interesting, impactful attack. This is pretty much your end game position. Once you've done all this spread damage with the likes of Black Ray GX, with Flying Flips, with potentially the Weavile, which we'll talk about later on, with even things like Bursting Balloon, Po-Town, Magma Secret Base, there's nothing wrong with just attacking, you know? You can just attack with things and not one-hit things. Anything can set up damage counters on the opponent's side of the board, so just manipulating this to be perfect math is just crazy good. I feel like I want to make a spread dot deck, and this Tapu Lele is one of the reasons why I want to make a spread dot deck, because one of the issues of spread decks is a lot of the time Espeon EX will be your end game card. You're like, okay, cool, I've Flying Flipped enough to KO 3 Zeruas, and now I'll go for it and win the game. But when you're up against non-evolving decks, it's really bad to play a spread deck. Like, really bad. But now you play Tapu Lele, and it's like, well, your opponent's used a Bridget, I can Flying Flip a bunch, and then later on I can deal with these 2 Volcanions in one turn, and that's their energy off the board. So I like that this card becomes an option for a spread deck, so that you can then manipulate that damage into 2 big knockouts or 1 big knockout and follow it up with like an N or something, and everything else is in range for following turns. So I want to see this see play. It's not hugely spreadable because... Sorry, it's not hugely versatile because it has that part Psychic energy cost. So I feel if a spread deck is to work, this will be in it. If a spread deck is not to work, this will see no play.
Yeah, it's definitely a strong attack. We've seen it as an ability on Dusknoir before, and it was insane. That was on stage 2. So this, even though it's only 2 energy, even though it is 2 energy, on a basic is really, really important. And yeah, like you say, if there's a spread deck that's good, then this is just going to be another very strong win condition. But if this deck never quite comes to fruition, then this card's probably going to stay in the binder for now. Next up, we have Crabominable, a really, really interesting stage 1 Pokemon actually, fighting type. For 1 energy, for 1 fighting, Guts Hammer does 80 damage, and then you do so you do damage to yourself equal to the number of damage counters already on you. So if you've got 40 on you, you take an extra 40. But the thing is, for 1 energy, like an 80 baseline is really good. If that's a strong energy, that's 100. If that's a choice band, that's 130. If you've got 2 Regirock out, that's 150 for 1 energy, and that's insane. It's a stage 1, so you have the evolution support. meaning that you can actually be one-shotting things in a lot of situations with a strong energy plus choice band plus the evolution of choice. You're one-shotting anything in the format that is weak to any of these evolutions plus fighting type. And Regirock plus choice band plus things like Kukui can push you into actually one-shot range, which is really, really interesting. Your whole deck is Brooklet Hill searchable if you're not playing the evolution package anyway, because Crabrawler is fighting type, of course. And then these guys are heavy ball searchable as well. So it's a pretty searchable deck. You can get a consistent amount of basics out, especially as we have Tapu Lele Bridget dot engine still here. And then multiple heavy balls and ultra balls and stuff will mean that you can indeed search out these Crabominables. Unfortunately, much like Gliscor and Honchkrow from the last set, I think it's just not quite good enough to be able to compete in the metagame. Psychic weakness is an issue. Given that things like Espeon and Garbodor are running around everywhere right now, you're going to be sort of limited to what you can do against non-EXs simply because Choice Band won't work. You need to fill your bench with Regirocks, which is kind of awkward. If you're Brooklet Hilling, you can't Brooklet Hill too many Regirocks because you need to have backup attackers as well. And then Strong Energy is always going to have weaknesses to Enhanced Hammer. So as much as this can be a really efficient attacker, unfortunately I don't think it quite has enough going for it to be able to make a break into the format.
I think one of the most awkward things is that Guts Hammer does damage to itself. Like, even though you have this nice 140 HP for a stage 1, that's really nice, by the way. People only need to deal 70. It's like you only have 70 HP. Otherwise you need to, like, max potion yourself. And I don't know if a deck like this can afford to play max potions to itself. Maybe you can Acerola, but even then it feels like a really sad turn for you. So it's deceiving how fragile this card is because of the damage you deal to yourself. You'll never be able to use it as a second attack because it's a really high cost and it's terrible. So you're all in on Guts Hammer. So even though it has seemingly high HP, it's really awkward to knock yourself out unless you're basically winning the game. But yeah, I want to try it because I don't care. I just want to do strong energy.
It's a stage 1 for 1 energy.
It's a stage 1 energy, choice band, evolutions. Let's go. Let's KO things. Hooray. I think one of the most awkward things, as you say, the weakness is a pain as well because you don't KO Garbodors in response and they carve through you. You need your abilities to be online in order to KO their Garbodors, and we know that's not always going to be the case. You also need to have your strong energy. So, yeah, it's awkward. But I feel the engine will be consistent. And that just... It's luring me in, Jack. I want to test this card, but...
Joe rated this card.
I know in my heart of hearts...
Joe did the slide.
In my heart of hearts, it probably won't see top tier play. But I want to... we'll move on. Okay, on to Lucario. This is truly... a 1-star card. We don't give 0 stars because we feel they're in the slideshow because they have something of note, and something of note means they're 1 star. This something of note is the ability Stance. Once during your turn, when you play this card from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may use this ability, prevent all effects of an attack, including damage done to this Pokemon during your opponent's next turn. So, complete immunity, even to effects, is incredible. And if you can spam this every turn with Devo Sprays, maybe some puzzles in there, you're infinity. You can't get knocked out forever, all game. You just sit there, stance in every turn. Devo Spray, stance. Puzzle, Devo Spray, stance. It's perfect, right? Oh, wait. Hex is in format and Garb's in format. Oh, no. This is a problem. The entire deck that you build has to be based around an ability, and that's inherently terrible right now. In addition to that, you need to commit 3 energy to him to even start attacking. So from turn 2, 3, your early stances are just so that you can attach pass. So that's terrible. At any point, if they get through you, or if any turn you whiff a Devo Spray, you've lost the game. So Lucario will see 0 play.
Yeah, also, things like Decidueye just need to put 3 or 4 counters on you, and you can't Devo... You're stuck. You're a 120 HP with 3 energy on. And it's just not good anymore. So yeah, Lucario, it has a cool ability, but unfortunately, Hex plus Garb plus Sniping is going to mean this card is very unimpactful, unfortunately. Next up, we have Rhyperior. Toppling Wind is returning. I think it was called something slightly different on the Aggron in Dragons Exalted, but it's the exact same ability. Got Stage 2, 160 HP. All of these things are irrelevant. His attack is irrelevant. We're looking at this ability. Toppling Wind, when you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may discard the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck. So we've got another mill card. Again, Devo Spray, Puzzle of Time, Devo Spray. All of these combos are really cool, but we're on a Stage 2. That's the big issue here. We've got Crushing Hammers, we've got Heavy Ball. The deck probably isn't super inconsistent because you've got Heavy Ball. And I would imagine Rhyhorn is probably Heavy Ball searchable as well, because these things are fat.
Yeah, he is.
So you're probably finding multiple of these turn 1, so you're probably getting a couple of Toppling Winds off, but you're still a Stage 2. Means you can't Rare Candy into this because you Devo Spray, then you need another Rare Candy to go back into the Toppling Wind. So you have to actually evolve these at least somewhat. So yeah, it's kind of awkward. You can't play a particularly efficient Stage 2 engine. We have Bunnelby, we have Alolan Vulpix to find these pieces, but it's just never going to be impactful enough on a Stage 2. You don't have the inherent speed to be able to outvalue your opponent discarding 3 to 6 cards of their deck, because they're going to be able to one-shot you. Well, they're going to be able to do enough to be able to deal with you every turn. And you're also weak to Grass, and Grass is a really good type right now. So yeah, the deck isn't going to have too much value, I don't think.
Yeah, it's kind of depressing for me because I feel with the Lele Bridget, with the Heavy Ball, with Alolan Vulpix, it feels like evolutions are so consistent right now. And it feels like this has more support. This ability has more support than it ever has had previously when we had the old Aggron and the old Rhyperior. I feel like if ever there's a chance for this to be good, it would be now. But then you just think, oh, Gardevoir-GX completely counters Mill, and Gardevoir-GX will be everywhere. Oh no. So yeah, it's a problem. Otherwise, the Rhyperior may be more than a 1-star card, because we have Beacon, Heavy Ball, Bridget. Like, you can actually set up 3 or 4 of this guide. It's not unrealistic. But, it's just not... Like, it is the right time, but then if you face the most... Well, what is likely to be the most popular deck, like 2 or 3 times in a tournament, you're out of the tournament. So you can't play Rhyperior. What a shame. On to Marshadow-GX, and we're going to try and be as brief as possible because me and Jack have already made another big discussion video that's going to be about the best decks in Standard post Burning Shadows, and I've made a slide about Marshadow, and I believe I could be rambling for a long time on that one, so I'm going to try and be brief on this guy. We've rated him a 3-star card for now. He's a very, very interesting one, and I believe a lot of people will still be putting this in the binder and grabbing him because he's one of these cards that could get nuts quite easily. It's a 150 HP GX, which is one of the downsides of him, but he does have the incredible ability Shadow Hunt. This Pokemon can use the attacks of basic Pokemon in your discard pile. You do, of course, still need the same energy that they need to attack with. So, straight off the bat, you can be using colorless attack cost Pokemon, things like Righteous Edge, things like Berserk, things like Miraculous Shine. These could all be copied greatly, or in certain decks, if you're just playing, you know, you're going to play some colors of energy naturally, you can just splash him in as a one-of to do these sorts of things here and there. He does have 2 of his own attacks. Beat Down for fighting colorless deals 120. Very, very mediocre, so it's probably all going to be on the ability, especially because his GX attack is also quite average for a single fighting. 100 Furious Dreams GX does 50 times the amount of basic energy attached to this Pokemon. Very similar to Lurantis GX. In fact, it's the same, but for basic energy rather than... Well, is Lurantis just basic energy or is it all grass? I can't remember.
It's just grass. It's not basic, it's grass.
Yeah, so it's, I guess in theory, better than Lurantis, but unfortunately Lurantis has its own acceleration, and Marshadow doesn't. So you're pretty much never going to be using its GX attack. Well, maybe sometimes, but I think the GX attack is an option, but it's mainly the Shadow Hunt here that is what's important. It's similar to like the Mew that we have, the Mew EX that we have in format, and the non-EX as well. These sorts of abilities have been great in the past, and they're just so So many options with this card that it is mind-boggling. Obviously, in Expanded, it's just made Night March crazy in terms of damage output, because you can have 12 Night Marches in your discard pile now and still announce Night March, which is crazy. Especially because you can even play things like Regirock-EX to increase your damage output. This is something that we never had from the Mew or the Mew EX. You can actually copy attacks, but also increase your own base output. We have Strong Energy, and we have potentially 3 or 4 Regirock that you can put on your bench. Now suddenly, a Righteous Edge can deal 110 damage for 1 energy with Choice Band Strong for Regirock, and that's incredible. Like, Righteous Edge is already a really relevant card. I mean, a really relevant attack in the format. Imagine it two-shotting things. That's like so nuts, right? That's so crazy that that could happen. Now, although it could happen, it does mean that you have to completely mold your deck around discarding Pokemon, which could be awkward. We know Vespiquen is kind of able to do it, but it'll be more specific because you need to find the right Pokemon into the discard pile, whereas Vespiquen is just the more the merrier, pretty much. And at the same time, it's an ability. Abilities right now can be shut off by Garbotoxin and Hexmaniac. I think post-rotation, Marshadow may only ever improve as more sets come out, and now that Hex is leaving the format, which means you can just play lots of Field Blowers to guarantee yourself attacking every turn. If you go for a heavy Marshadow-GX deck, that's down the line though. I feel for now we won't be playing a heavy Marshadow-GX deck at all. I believe he'll only find a way into a few niche decks here and there, based on having a different weakness to your attackers, having a different, hitting for weakness on certain attackers, and just being an extra copy of an attacker in certain decks. So things like Drampergarb, you can be like a third Dramper if you only want to play 2 Drampers, and then you can hit for weakness on Mirrors, for example. But bear in mind, in Mirror, you have Psychic weakness, so it's actually not good for Mirror. However, against Darkrai, this could be a Mirror card. Darkrai-EX will already be playing a heavy discard engine because of the new Darkrai-GX. So you're likely to maybe put something in your discard pile, and if it's going to be one of your Darkrai-EXs, it means that Marshadow can copy it for later use. So it seems pretty good to me. That was kind of like a disjointed discussion, but that's only because Marshadow is like so versatile and difficult to analyze. But in short, from my end, I feel he'll be a tech for now and potentially a deck for later.
This card is bonkers. And if Guardy wasn't in this set, this would be my favorite. This might still be my favorite card in the set, even though Guardy is insane. I think this has so much potential for the future. Pick up 4 of this, because I think Shadowbox is going to be a deck at some point. Post Sun and Moon, we don't have any ability lock right now, so ability lock isn't an issue. All we need is like one card that discards cards from your deck, like one GX attack that's just search your deck for 5 cards, discard your 5 cards from your deck, whatever. That kind of thing on a basic. And this card is insane. This card is so close to being broken, I think. But because of where it is right now, we have a lot of ability lock. It's got Psychic weakness. It's got 150 HP. And you're so reliant on the ability. It's only a 3-star going into the format we go into. But as Joe said, it's a card that only ever, I think, increases in value. And these box-style decks have always been like a weakness of mine, to be fair. But I think this card is so close to being broken already. I think it just needs 1 or 2 extra pieces, and this is going to be an insane sort of contender in the format. This may not be my favorite card for playability, but it is definitely my favorite card for creativity in this set for sure.
Yeah, definitely. There's actually one thing I forgot to mention that I've remembered. This could also be an immediate buff to Vileplume box. You gain 30 HP on the Mew EX, from the Mew EX jumping to Marshadow. And also one of the biggest issues of Plume Box is that bench space is really awkward because you have to like Shaman and Lele to find your combo turn 1. So you don't really have bench space for all your different Regice, Glaceon, Jolteon, all these sorts of cards. So instead you can go for a heavier cycle route and have lots of Acrobikes, Ultra Balls, which would, again, it will increase your speed and likelihood of hitting turn 1 Plume. And now it synergizes with Marshadow as well. Gets in the discard pile. So it could be an instant buff to Plume Box as well, which could be pretty interesting and something I kind of want to test with because
that sounds gross.
Because Plume Box hasn't ever been like top tier. I know it actually did fairly well at Worlds last time. That's when it sort of popped up because Ninja Boy. But Marshadow is like a big buff for the deck, so maybe that's worth more consideration for the future as well, thanks to this guy.
Yeah, interesting. Next up, we have Machamp-GX. Unfortunately, I'm so much less enthusiastic about this GX. 250 HP is awesome. Psychic weakness is not. It kind of means the 250 HP is 130, which is really, really mediocre against one of the biggest decks in the format. But 250 is still relevant against a lot of other things. We have Machoke as well, which is really cool. But I think overall this card's still very mediocre. For 2 fighting, crosscut is doing 60, and if your opponent's active isn't evolution, you're doing 60 more. 120 for 2 is cool with strong energy plus Regirock support. But it's still a stage 2, so like all of these good things I'm going to say about this card are kind of held back by the fact it's still a stage 2, and it's still actively 2 attachments, so you have to go down the Carbink break route, I think, to ever get this guy set up efficiently. For 3 fighting, Bedrock Unbalanced does 130, discard a stadium in play. With strong energy plus choice band, you're doing 180, you're knocking out an EX, that's cool, but unfortunately it's still 3 energy on a stage 2. And then the GX attack does 180 and isn't for 3 fighting and isn't affected by resistance. So that's 230 with only one strong energy plus choice band, but it's still 3 energy on a stage 2. And that's the biggest sort of downside of this card. We've got Brooklet Hill, so we can search out Machops and even Vulpixes to beacon our way into the stage 2. And like I say, we have Machoke, so if you can get an early Machoke, it's going to mean you're protected from spread damage, from snipe attacks. You're going to not be anywhere near as susceptible to things like to Espeon Devolution, but you're still not doing enough. It's still actively attaching 3 energy or going down the Carbink break route, meaning you're not beaconing out your pieces, meaning you're having to find them yourself, and you're always going to be weak to Psychic. So there's just too many little things this card trips up on, I think, for it to be able to compete with the other stage 2s we have in format right now.
Yeah, I mean, play it if you hate Decidueye, I guess, but that's really kind of about it. You can play 4 Machokes in a deck now, guys. Amazing. But yeah, the Psychic weakness is horrible, and being a stage 2 is so bad in every way in the card game. The only stage 2s that are functional right now are like Decidueye, which cheats because of Forest, Metagross, and Guardy. And Metagross and Guardy are inherently nuts, like, in themselves. In a vacuum, they are nuts cards. Because Machamp doesn't have anything broken about it, you are disadvantaging yourself so much for no payoff. So, yeah, Machamp will not see play. Next up we have Lunatone. This is actually one that I think could be a little impactful. Maybe a little hot tech for Worlds, potentially. He is a 90 HP basic Pokemon that has the ability Heal Block. Damage can't be healed from any Pokemon. Pretty simple. There are decks right now that need healing. Imagine Wailord coming back. It probably won't, because that's Grass Weakness, which is terrible right now, but these sorts of decks, the Sylveons, the Wailords, the Houndoom Charizards of the world, they can't max potion anymore, and that's really good for you. But perhaps the most important one is Metagross-GX. Metagross is likely going to see play at Worlds because of its auto-win against Guardy. Well, maybe not auto-win, but very strong matchup against Guardy. And against everything that's not Guardy, the max potion approach is how it will win its games. So if you are otherwise struggling against Metagross, putting in the Lunatone could be awesome for you. The weird thing is that Hex is also really good against Metagross, so if you have them both in play, and like you Hex on certain terms to stop them attacking, it means they can actually get their max potions, which is really weird. So you have to think about whether it's more important to stop their healing forever, or just stop their abilities to stop them attacking every turn. So it's a bit of a weird trade-off. I think overall the Lunatone is better than the Hex, if you're up against Metagross, but Hex is the versatile counter card. It's good for all sorts of things, so maybe this tech won't see as much play because people will just play Hex instead. But I like having this option in the format. It's a pretty cool one for me.
Yeah, I think it's going to be one of those. It's a bit like Sudowoodo. We've got it in format, so it'll be it will be put into decks when we've got healing that's relevant, and when there's no healing Pokemon, it won't be seen in play. It's just one of those nice abilities to have access to. Next up, we have Lycanroc, the non-EX Lycanroc that can be splashed into Lycanroc style decks. Unfortunately, there's no real Lycanroc deck out there right now. Otherwise, I think this is a pretty cool card to have, but unfortunately, it just doesn't fit anywhere right now. For one fighting, you're doing Dangerous Claw for 30 damage. If your opponent's active as a basic, this is doing 30 more damage. So with a Choice Band, you're one-shotting Drampers, which is really cool. You don't even need Strong Energy, you just need to attach a Choice Band and announce Dangerous Claw. That's a really, really nice sort of niche use to have. Same with Darkrai as well. But against these matchups, you're going to have a good match. You're going to be favored anyway because you're running a Lycanroc-GX anyway. It's going to be nice having this non-EX attacker to swing the prize trade if you want, but you're probably naturally favored in these matchups anyway, so it's really not that impactful. And then Corner, for fighting DC, does 90 damage and your opponent can't retreat. As we mentioned earlier on, there's rumours of Slowking Rockruff doing well. Corner now doing damage means that you're actually applying pressure at the same time, which is really cool. But you're never going to be getting to a point... You're going to be two-shotting things, which is also where you want to be. You don't be one-shotting things because it's going to mean the text is irrelevant. So it's again, a cool option to have. But whilst Lycanroc is relevant in format, whilst it's got Grass Weakness, whilst Decidueye, Golisopod, Lurantis, to an extent, Vespiquen are all relevant Pokemon. You know, Lycanroc is going to stay in the binder, as is this Lycanroc here. It's a nice non-EX attacker to have if Lycanroc ever gets good, but I think whilst Lycanroc-GX is only splashed here and there for its ability and maybe once in a while its attack, this card is very, very niche in its value.
Yeah, very niche. I think the Lycanroc deck, as like its own archetype, is like yearning for a single energy attacker. Unfortunately, this one just doesn't do enough, so pretty sure it won't see play. And yeah, Grass Weakness is terrible right now, so Lycanroc's probably not in a great spot. Next up we have Alolan Muk-GX. We rated this quite low because I know a few people have been discussing the card and think it's worth exploring. I have put time into this card and I thought, you know what? Some people have thought it's okay. Let's try and build 60 cards. And then I confirmed to myself that this is definitely a 1-star card. I think the list looks really ugly if you're trying to actually make it work. Let's talk about the card in general though. It has 220 HP as a dark type, which is quite nice for a stage 1. It has Fighting Weakness, which isn't terrible. There is Marshadow, of course, but that's pretty much the main one I could think of right now. And it has a Resistance to Psychic, which is a pretty good resist to have. It has 3 attacks. The first, for a Dark Double Colourless, is the one that most people are trying to get creative with. A 10 base of damage, and you do 70 more for each special condition affecting your opponent's active Pokemon. Salazzle is the first combo card that comes to mind. You can be doing 150 base of Chemical Breath once you've used a Hot Poison, and then you can add in things like Choice Band, and of course the Hot Poison dealing 30 damage can get you into 210 damage, and that's okay. 210 is a good baseline to be going for. And for Dark DC on something as bulky as this guy is pretty decent actually. We don't have much Dark Acceleration. I don't think you'll be playing things like Baby Yveltal. But it's not too big of a problem when you're so tanky. It's like a Decidueye doesn't need energy acceleration because it can tank hits and naturally attach its way through the game. And potentially Muck can do the same thing. It's awkward playing Salazzle because you need to play things like Devo Sprays, Scoop Ups, and you're playing multiple stage 1s, so it takes up a load of space. And it means that if anyone hexes you on any turn, or if you end to a low hand size, your base damage is 10. If ever you miss a Hot Poison, your base damage is terrible. You really just waste a turn. Or you can attach an extra energy and do Crunch for 120. I guess on turns you get hexed, you just have to attach an energy to your Muck again. But in situations where your Muck is going to get knocked out the following turn, that's terrible for you because you want to start attaching to your benched Muck to actually have an attack the following turn. Crunch for 2 dark, 2 colourless does 120, and discard an energy attached to your opponent's active. We've seen this attack on a Dragonite EX, the really good pull-up Dragonite. I say it's really good. It's not really good because of its attack. It's really good because of its ability. Its attack is actually 4 colorless cost, and it's a terrible attack. So Crunch is really bad. However, we do have a pretty interesting, for the first time ever, a free GX attack cost. That's pretty interesting. It's Trihazzard-GX. You switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with their active. The new active is now burned, paralyzed, and poisoned. Just like what we were saying with the Raichu from the set, auto paralysis is not what it used to be. It's actually a lot less valuable, especially because you also have burn and poison, because it means you've dealt damage to the opponent, which means Acerola is a live target, it means Guzma is a live target anyway, as is Super Scoop Up, as is all these other combo outs, and yeah, that's just a problem. Even Evolving is an out, because there's a lot more evolution decks around, so although it is a free GX attack and it's something you can do on turn 2 if you've missed an attachment here and there, or if you haven't developed Hot Poison or whatever else, you will go for it. You'll try and strand something and cross your fingers and force things like Guzma, Acerola, which is kind of okay for you. If you're attaching to your active, forcing a Guzma is actually fine. But it's just not impactful. Even though it's a free attack that is impactful, you can only do it once, so kind of awkward, and it doesn't actually combo with Chemical Breath as well as you think, because they may not be burned coming back, and they're always no longer paralyzed, so they may only be left with poison, which means Chemical Breath is only doing 80, and you still have to hot poison them. So yeah, the synergy seems there, but it's actually deceptively bad, and it's a lot to not only get going by turn 2, it's a lot to maintain throughout the game, which is why Alolan Muk is really bad in my books.
Yeah, unfortunately, as interesting as this card is, there's just not enough going for it. We do obviously have the Alolan Muk from Base Sun and Moon, Power of Alchemy. Still a pretty relevant ability considering we've got now we've got Tapu Lele. It was good against Shaman. It's good against Tapu Lele. So you've got some cool ability lock in there as well. But it's still not doing enough. Also, even with the new Alolan Grimer as well, Division letting you grab a second Alolan Grimer to guarantee a turn 2 Muck still isn't enough for this deck, I don't think. So yeah, just because special conditions aren't anywhere near as powerful as they were literally just before this set came out, it's going to mean that Chemical Breath isn't particularly strong at all. I think if we didn't have these counters to special conditions, this could actually be a really, really interesting card. Because, like you say, it's bulky, plus its energy cost isn't even that horrible. Dark DCE on a stage 1 isn't that bad, considering it's going to be one-shotting a lot of things, especially as we have things like Lysander. But you know, it's just not good enough. So despite how bulky it is, despite how annoying it could be, there's too many counters for it, unfortunately. Next up, we have Alolan Raticate, a card we mentioned a little bit earlier on. Really, really interesting card, actually. 2 stars, simply because I think it's going to be difficult to rate this card a 1-star card. It essentially has a free attack that does 90 damage, which is insane. Reinforced Fang does 10 damage. If you have a tool attach, you're doing an extra 50. If it's a choice band, you're doing an extra 30 to GXs and EXs. So the fact that you're doing base 60 anyway means that you're knocking out, even with a choice band, you're still knocking out things like Alolan Vulpix and Rowlet, things like that. You're going to be doing enough damage to take those cheeky prizes early on anyway. You're then going to be doing 90 for free on EXs and GXs. So that's going to be 2-shotting a lot of EXs and really setting up, even if it's just devolution plays, or just setting up for later in the game. What 3 for 90, not even 1 for 90, 0 for 90 is a really, really efficient attack, of course. So yeah, that's really, really interesting. Heavy Ball Searchable is cool. The second attack is pretty irrelevant, but having this stage 1 plus things like Vaporeon, Vaporeon, Flareon, and Jolteon is what I'm going for, to have multiple types as well, means that you're actually one-shotting some really, really cool things like Volk, you're one-shotting for free. It's just a really, really versatile card. Unfortunately, the biggest issue we've had here is working out what do you do with your energy if you're not attaching it active. We need to find a good partner, and that's why Salazzle could, as we mentioned earlier on, could be that partner. You take your first 3 prizes. You take one on a Rowlet, one on maybe even a Decidueye. If you're able to get a couple of these guys set up and a Flareon, you're going to be two-shotting Decidueyes, which is cool for free. And then for the rest of the game, you can Salazzle your way through the rest of the game, no matter what they bring up. So yeah, there's definitely potential here. It's got 2 stars simply because 0 for 90 plus evolution support is really, really cool. Any free attack is definitely worth talking about. But the biggest issue we've found so far is just working out what to do with all this spare energy you've got. If you're not attaching it active, what are you doing with it? Well, if that's the only crutch of the deck, then I think Alolan Raticate definitely has potential to see play in the future.
Yeah, it's one that I really want to test out. There's actually another card that I forgot to mention that's relevant here, and that's the Alolan Rattata. It actually has free retreat as well, so it means that it's a good lead. When you do evolve it, it becomes a lot bulkier in terms of retreat cost, but also in terms of HP. 120 is a lot to get over, and with Psychic Resist as well, it could even be annoying for Gardevoir. Obviously, you're only doing like 60 to a guard, but you're two-shotting and they're probably two-shotting you, and you're setting up things in the background, and I think that's the way you have to see this card. I don't think we're ever going to play a zero-energy Raticate deck. I don't think it does enough. The benefits that you get of playing a zero-energy deck aren't outweighed because you can't really finish off a game too often, and basically the slots that would be energy are just excess tools and like eco arms and stuff like that, which is just really crazy. But yeah, I like him as a lead, and I think Salazzle is actually the best idea I've had so far for the Alolan Raticate, to be honest. But there will be other attackers. It's like why Magnezone Yanmega worked previously. That was like one of the best decks in format for many reasons. A while back, we're talking about now, but basically the early game was dominated by a free energy attacking Yanmega, and you could spend your manual attachments on something that will then take your future prizes, and that's how I see Alolan Raticate being strongest. I think it outclasses Yanmega currently, because Yanmega's an ability, which is a problem, and also its own ability, even when it is online, is awkward for you to negotiate, whereas this is very, very easy to activate, getting a tool on. I like what you said, Jack, that 60 is actually a really good number, even if you're not, like, even if the choice band is on the Raticate, it's still, you know, the plus 50 that gets you into knocking out all sorts of 60 HP Pokemon. There's tons of them out there. So, yeah, I want to build him. I want to make him work, and when that Salazzle box comes out, I'm going to test it, for sure. Very cool card. Next up, we have Darkrai-GX. This is one that I'm sure a lot of people are hyped about. Darkrai is like a fan favorite card since Dark Explorers. It has the Resurrection ability. Once during a turn, if this Pokemon is in your discard pile, you may put this Pokemon onto your bench and attach 1 Darkness Energy from your discard pile to this Pokemon. Very, very strong ability for sure. This is the big selling point of this card in my opinion. Getting a free energy attachment is really good. Putting it into the discard pile shouldn't be too difficult. We can even tier and gauge the deck in a more aggressive way. The entire deck has Psychic Resistance, so you're not too worried about playing things like Acrobikes and Ultra Balls and Sycamores. You can play them not really to your heart's content, but to a decent extent and stay out of Gardevoir range. Which means you can pile this guy into the discard pile quite a few times. I believe he'll probably be like a 2 or 3 count in Turbo Darkrai. I don't think you're going to play like a Skyfield 4 of Turbo Darkrai build, right? Because you lose too much energy whenever people Field Blower or replace the stadium. But I think as like a 1 or 2 of, giving you, you know, a free 40 damage, definitely in early game, that early damage is really impactful for reaching KOs as quickly as possible, saving you turns of just waiting around. Is really good, and it means that you don't really ever lose your output. They can't ever Lysander KO this guy because you can just resurrect back to the bench, so you never really lose energy. Yeah, it's just a really good card that goes instantly into Turbo Darkrai and maybe revives the archetype. In my own little like think tank of what's going on in the format, I actually feel that Gardevoir is getting worse in the meta because of Guardy, pretty much. Which means I can foresee Turbo Darkrai actually becoming Turbo Darkrai again, where you play lots of items, and I believe that tends towards this Darkrai-GX card because it needs to be found, you need to dig into it, and then you need to discard it all at once. So when you're cycling through the deck, this effect becomes a lot better. He also does have a couple of attacks which are worth mentioning, seeing as though he attaches to himself. For 2 Dark and a Colourless, he does Dark Rift, which does 130 and isn't affected by resistance. It's like 130 for 3, but it's actually 130 for 2 energy because you're only spending 2 turns to attach to him. And again, we can play things like Elixir, so it's a really fast 130 damage actually, and 130 is not terrible. We've seen Choice Band Kukui getting into 180, so even that is worth noting. And then Dark End GX has, for again, that cost of 2 Dark and a Colourless. If your opponent's active Pokemon is affected by a special condition, that Pokemon is now knocked out. So if someone uses an Imakuni on themselves to get confused, you can KO them. But yeah, I don't think you're going to start playing special condition Darkrai. Like, we've tried Darkhead with Hypno, and that's never been good. So I don't think you'll start playing a way to get special conditions, although lasers in Expanded get a free knockout. Sure, that sounds pretty good. So yeah, it's something to note for Expanded more than anything else. And I also kind of like the card as a tech option in things like Mega Rayquaza. Instead of playing Mega Turbo, it may be better for you to play Darkrai-GX because he fills up a bench slot for you, so he's 30 damage, whilst at the same time being the activator for energy. It's going to be interesting to see if it's more difficult to discard a Darkrai plus an energy than it is to Mega Evolve and find a single energy in your discard pile, if that makes sense. Because it's 2 targets that you have to discard, it may be more difficult for you, especially because you can't hooper out a GX Pokemon, than it is to get a single energy into the discard pile. But you can only activate the Mega Turbo once you've hit your Mega Evolution. And sequencing-wise, you can hit the energy switch once you've found the Darkrai. So I don't know, it may be more consistent than Mega Turbo in terms of early game, but in like mid to late game, it's definitely better, I think, for you. Because the E-Switch can be used in lots of different spots, and you can even E-Switch like Leles and stuff to attack with. So potentially this is where Rayquaza gets a small adaptation. Same time as well, Mega Gardy. I actually don't think it's that good in Mega Gardy. I think Mega Turbo is better in that deck, but again, it can be a recyclable card anyway, even if you're not playing. Maybe you play like a single Dark Energy in Mega Gardy, who knows? But you just you get a 330 damage every turn, right? You get a 310 damage with the Darkrai if you're playing Mega Gardy. So, like an Execute where you can just play Skyfield and be like, haha, here's 40 damage, discard it all again. Haha, here's 40 damage, discard it all again. Potentially Darkrai Seas plays in those sorts of decks as well.
Yeah, I think genuinely you've hit pretty much the nail on the head. The only other thing I have to say about this card is that why is it a Darkrai? It could have been any other Pokemon. Why does it have to be a Darkrai? But yeah, Darkrai's a fan favorite. It fits into the archetype really well. We've just got to see how much this pushes its way into the archetype. I think there's going to be lists that maybe run 1 to 2, like we say, and there's going to be lists that maybe even drop a Darkrai-X to go full Skyfield for Darkrai-GX and just go completely crazy. We're just going to have to see how this card fits into the Turbo Dark archetype. I think other than that, though, it's just a really, really cool card to have. Resurrect abilities are always kind of cool. I just kind of wish it wasn't on any other Dark Pokemon. I would have been happy. But still, we can play Darkrai now. So along with playing Sableye, Garb, and Plume, we can play Darkrai now. But yeah, other than that, the cards are really, really cool and definitely worth the 4 stars, I think.
Jack, we can actually play Darkrai.
Because yeah, next up we have Darkrai. Unfortunately, we're not going to be playing this Darkrai simply because it's never really going to be doing enough in the matchup in any matchup. For 2 energy, you're doing Hypnoblast, 30 damage. Your opponent's active is asleep. This would be cool again if we didn't have Guzma, Acerola, Scoop Up in this set. Asleep is just like paralysis. It's worth a lot less. Especially as they can also flip out of it as well now, meaning that sometimes they don't even need to waste their supporter or any items for the turn to still be hitting you in the face. And then Dark Raid for Dark DCE does 80 damage, and if your opponent's GX already, you do 80 damage more. So that's 160 for 3 energy. That's pretty efficient on a basic non-EX. But you're never gonna want to play this to flip the prize trade because you're playing Oblivion Wing anyway. Oblivion Wing has 10 more HP and you're committing less to it. So simply you're just better off using your Voltol as your non-EX. And by the time there's not many decks that GX insanely early. So by the time you're getting value from Dark Raid, you're probably getting one shots anyway through ramping into Turbo Darkrai's Dark Pulse anyway. So I think this card is relatively low impact just in general because we have a non-EX Dark type that is, in my opinion, better anyway. And also by the time this card is relevant in games, you should have a board where you're doing minimum 160 anyway, whether your opponent is GX attacked or not.
Nail on the head. Right. Next up we have Weavile. This is a pretty cool card. Maybe an inclusion in the sort of spread decks that me and Jack were talking about earlier, because it has the Dark Law attack for a single colorless energy, which deals 60 damage to each Pokemon that has any abilities. That is both yours and your opponent's, so be careful when you start putting down your own Shaymins and Leles. But 60 to everything for 1 energy is crazy if everything is what your opponent has. If they're playing an ability focused deck. Think about things like Decidueye, Metagross, Volcanion, there is Guardy as well. Guardy will be playing Octillery and Gallade, which you also catch out, which is pretty cool. And even like Zoroark you could then devolve and KO every Zorua. That would be like crazy good. So in terms of efficiency, if you hit the right decks, it's crazy good, this amount of damage that you spread for 1 energy. Really good. It also has free retreat and 90 HP, so it's searchable. You can retreat out of it, and it's a colorless cost, so like potentially splashable, but not really splashable because it would have to be in a dedicated spread deck, in my opinion. The only awkward thing is when you come up against the decks that aren't ability focused, and you're like, oh no, it's a Golisopod. What do I do? What do I do? Nothing, I guess. Pass. And then that's when you're playing a spread deck and you're playing like a 2-2 Weavile line and it's getting no value for you and it's 4 dead cards. The spread deck already sounds like it'll be playing lots of situational Pokemon like the Lele, the Espeon, as well as like Coco's Necrozma, all these sorts of things. I'm going to try and get a channel out on the list for a spread deck, but I don't feel I'll have the space to play Weavile. That's the main reason why I don't think it'll see play. And of course it hurts yourself at times, because I imagine you still need to play like Bridget to get set up, so that will in turn hurt you as well.
Yeah, it's because it's a stage 1, it's not quite going to be doing enough, and like you say, there's going to be matchups where it just doesn't do anything. The fact it doesn't do a base damage to your opponent's active means you can't even like do 10, choice band this to 40 and at least poke them. You're just doing nothing. So it's a cool attack, but it's an attack that we've kind of seen before, and it's never really taken off. So unfortunately, I don't think Weavile is in any better shape than it has been in the past. Next up, we have Gardevoir-GX. Oh boy. There's so much to say about this card. Gardevoir-GX, 230 HP, stage 2. Ability Secret Spring. Once during a turn before you attack, you may attach a fairy energy from your hand to one of your Pokemon. That's anywhere. That's 1 fairy. That's not your attachment for the turn. That's setting up a benched attacker. That's attaching to Guardy to increases the infinite force attack for 1 fairy doing 30 damage times the number of energy on both active Pokemon. So it's Psychic Infinity without that base 10, but you're only requiring 1 energy, not a DCE, which is really, really good. Being able to, if you can get 2 of this guy out, you can ramp into so much damage with Choice Band. And your opponent having 1 energy on, you need 2 energy on, you're doing 120, so you're 2-shotting things for 2 energy on a 230 HP Mon. And then Twilight-GX. Anyone remember Lysander's trump card, the card that started off this ban list that we're now seeing quarterly? Well, Twilight-GX is the best part about that card. It shuffles in 10 cards from your discard into your deck, so you're Lysander's trump carding for the exact 10 outs you need. So you can't be drawing into your routes again, your Curliers again, your Bridgets again. No, you're drawing into energy, you're drawing into DCE every turn, you're drawing into Lysander next turn. You know, you're drawing into the exact card you want. And then it's so much versatility. Against mill decks, you're just throwing 10 decent cards in. Against Garb, you're throwing 10 items in, resetting their damage completely. making them deal 230 damage from and leaving like 1 or 2 items minimum in your discard pile, so they're not really being able to ever apply much pressure. You have you're a stage 2 anyway, so you have Gallade. The deck runs Octillery because it's running Bridget Engine, so your Gallade Octillery as well. Your Gallade Octillery with a really good attacker that also covers like other types. You're one-shotting Drampas really easily. You're one-shotting Darkrai's really easily. Not that's an issue because you've got resistance on Darkrai anyway. Who cares? You're drawing through your deck. You're setting up multiple attackers, so you're pretty much one-shotting everything. This card is insanely good. It's nuts how good this card is. The only downside is it is weak to Metal, which means Metagross has a pretty good matchup against you. But even then, they have to commit 3 energy, so they technically cut off 90 of their own HP. With the Choice Band, they cut off 120 of their own HP. They're down to 130. That's not even out of range for a Gardevoir to respond on them. It's really not. With the efficiency, like being able to premonition into exactly what you want, means that you're just getting multiple Guardies out so efficiently. What we found from testing is if you can get a fairly decent turn 1 and turn 2, you win. It's that simple. If you hit 2 to 3 routes and 1 to 2 Octillery, 1 to 2 Remoraid, you win the game. It's insane how good this card is. We've also got support from Diancie and Rabombi from this set, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. Diancie letting you search and auto-evolve your Pokemon, so you can actually start evolving into Curliers on turn 1, on your turn 1, meaning that you can guarantee a Gardevoir turn 2, meaning that you don't even have to play Rare Candies if you don't want. You can play a thicker Curlier line instead, replacing the Rare Candies for more Curliers, meaning that you're, again, nowhere near weak to Garb, so maybe you don't even need to Twilight-GX because you haven't played the items anyway. You can just keep punching them in the face with infinite force. And then Rabombi searches out 2 energy per turn, so you're guaranteeing your attachment plus your Secret Spring. So that's a bonus 60. If you have another Gardevoir-GX attack, Gardevoir-GX out, you're guaranteeing 2 free attachments plus an attachment for turn, which can be a DCE. So that means you're setting up a Gardevoir in a turn doing 120 minimum. Then all of their energy on top. Then your own Choice Band, 150 minimum. This card is nuts.
Yeah, I mean, you've explained every combo, every reason why this card is good, but it's not just that it's good. It's so incredibly good. This card enters the format. I've tested this deck for maybe like 20 games, and I know for a fact it is by far the best deck in format. By far the best deck in format. There is no doubt in my mind that this is the best deck in format for certain. There is no doubt that this is the best deck in format. It comes in having a close to auto win to Drampa-Garb and Espeon-Garb, the 2 most popular archetypes that we've currently got in the format. The deck that's just won North America, it comes in and auto wins it. Then you think that Metagross is pretty much the only thing that can compete with this guy. Like, it really is. The only weakness is something that every card has, a ×2 weakness in the format. So it's so incredible. Like, the card is crazy. It's so much damage. Like, Mega Mewtwo was insane, and it was a stage 1 that had to have a Spirit Link and had to use Mega Turbos to ramp up. No, the ramp is all in the card. It's all here. And you can ramp like 120 damage a turn if you only have 2 Guardies out, and that's a mediocre board state for you, you know? It's like, it's crazy how good this card is. And the GX attack, Trump card was banned. Inserting cards from your discard pile back into your deck is inherently so brokenly good. And again, you can just do it. And 230 HP is actually so big for so many things. We've seen Decidueye tanking hits all over the place, and that's a reason why it's so popular. Same thing for Metagross. The entire deck is based around tanking and healing. 230 is not far away from that amount, and in our list, we are playing a couple of Max Potion. Only a couple, that's all you need, because you can put back your Max Potions with your GX attack, but
premonition them out.
The fact that everything is 1 energy on this card as well means that you can do minimal commitment to your active Pokemon while stacking a Guardia for the bench. You can be like, okay, Max Potion active, I'll GX attack this turn. They can't not deal with the active, but they also can't not deal with the benched Guardia with 230 HP and 3 energy on it. Even 3 energy is such a threat because the following turn that could be 7 energy, and like then that's blowing up everything. The card's incredible. The card's just so nuts. There's no way that I can put it other than the card is just so damn good. For me, Octillery Glade is by far the best version, but we will be getting into some of the fairy options right now because I need to calm down. Whew. Back to a slightly worse card. Diancie. This was actually in the Japanese winning list as a 1 count, so it's interesting to see that we've rated this as a 1-star card. This is because in our theory craft, I'm personally not a fan of playing Fairy Garden in the deck. And if you're not playing Fairy Garden in the deck, it means that only playing a one-of Diancie does not make sense, because you will start it a very low amount of times. If you're playing multiple Diancie, you're dedicating a lot of slots to cards that are very dead later on. And although you can Glade them to your 5th card slot and never actually draw into it, it's still diluting the deck in terms of its potential later on. So I feel with very limited switching cards in our build of Guardy, and it makes it not really relevant as a 1 slot, and the fact that you don't want to play more than 1 slot, for me, makes it seem really bad. It also has to compete with Alolan Vulpix. I know it's slightly different with its attacks. Alolan Vulpix is still an option for you, and I feel like if you want to play a 1 count, the Vulpix may be better for you because you can commit energy elsewhere, or you can pay retreat if you happen to start a non-Vulpix Pokemon. You can just pay retreat turn 1 on Remoraid or Ralts. And bear in mind, there are the lists of Guardy right now, they're never fitting more than 2 Fairy Garden in the deck. So even if you play 2 Garden and 1 Diancie, it's so rare that you'll be getting Sparkling Prayer working that quickly. It's really, really rare for you. This is what the attacks do, though. For a single Fairy, you get to search a deck for a card that evolves from one of your Pokemon and put it onto that Pokemon. So getting some freebie evolution out is great if you can develop Octillery or develop a Curlier that then you can just evolve straight up into a Guardy. Does make it consistent for you. It's item lock proofing as well, which could be important. That's one of the reasons I do see the Diancie ever seeing play. It's if Plume becomes much more popular. Because Plume might have a good matchup against Guardy if it's playing a heavy Candy Engine. So maybe Diancie's in here to try and balance that out. That might have been why the Japanese player played the 1 count, just for a matchup reason rather than just general setup reason, if that makes sense. So it is a good attack for sure. It gets up multiple Guardies, and you don't really care about the energy attachment because you can just ramp up so much later on anyway. Its second attack is Diamond Storm that does 30 and heals 30 from each of your each of your fairy Pokemon, so that's itself as well. So it can actually ruin the spread deck, which is quite funny. It would really make the spread deck quite sad. But I believe Curlier... Does Curlier have 80 HP or 70? I believe it's 80, right? It might even be 90.
I think it's 80, yeah.
I think it's 80.
I think it's 80.
Yeah, so it's even a Necrozma that can heal out of it. That would be so funny to see. Just imagine that board state. Anyway, yeah, that heal could be relevant against like Decidueyes or like Cocos and stuff, but rarely ever relevant. It's really the first attack that matters. But for me, I'm not a fan. This is one that we could be wrong on though, and Diancie could see staple play in Guardy.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really cool attack, and I can see why he ran it. But again, I think from our testing, unless Plume is back where it was, like pre-Guardians Rising, I think I'd still rather go for this Rare Candy line, just because turn 2 Guardy is, like, through that way, I think is a little bit more consistent than playing the Fairy Garden plus the Diancie build. But it's a nice option to have, and it's probably one, like, I'm going to be testing the hell out of Guardy after Liverpool. So I'm definitely going to give the Diancie version a try and probably just do some turn 1 to 2s and see which version is more consistent. Next up, we have Ribombee, another card that I mentioned back when talking about Guardy itself. Honey Gather, once during a turn, you may search your deck for 2 basic energy, put them into your hand, shuffle your deck afterwards. Obviously, the synergy is there with Guardy, but it also has synergy with Mega Sceptile, Greninja, and indeed Volcanion, very similar to Starmie and Volcanion right now. However, you're searching from the deck rather than the discard. That's really, really cool. I think this is best for Mega Sceptile. But it pretty much works the same way for all of these Pokemon. It's just whether you're going to be Space Beaconing, whether you're going to be having enough cards to discard with Space Beacon, as opposed to having Ribombee searching the deck instead. Space Beacon kind of recycles for these cards, for these Pokemon, which is, I think, in my opinion, better, and therefore will mean Starmie remains better than Ribombee. But it's nice having the option to search from the deck instead. And also, technically, it's a better end-proofing card than Space Beacon, because Space Beacon takes away takes away one card from your one bad card from your hand, whereas Honey Gather technically takes away 2 cards from the deck. So if your opponent's ending you, that's 2 energy cards that maybe you wouldn't have wanted to draw into because they're not Lysander, they're not Guzma, things like this. So yeah, it's very, very comparable to Starmie, and certain decks will prefer it, but I think in general it's a pretty low impact card, because I think a lot of the time Starmie is probably going to be slightly better for resource management.
Yeah, I think Starmie outclasses it in the non-Guardy decks. Potentially it makes the space in the Guardy deck, but personally we're just blinded by the beauty of Octillery Gallade Engine. So I think that's the one people will opt for. But who knows, there could be a full fairy list that just goes for the Honey Gather approach. So I think it's one that we have to explore. For now, though, I'm underwhelmed by it. Next up, we have Noivern-GX. This is one that's actually one of the more controversial GXs in the set, I think. Controversial because when it came out, people kind of went crazy, because it is the combination of everyone's favourite Seismitoad and Giratina EX, all crunched into one card, because it has 3 very interesting attacks. The first is Distortion. This is the Toad part of the card. For a dark colourless, you deal 50, and your opponent can't play any item cards from their hand during their next turn. So it's Quaking Punch for a DDE, or 2 basic energy cards, on a stage 1, that is 20 more base damage than Quaking Punch. Now, it is much worse than Quaking Punch, let's not go crazy here, because it's potentially always a turn slower. Quaking Punch, if you go second, you can do it on your first turn. That can only happen if you're playing Noivern with Wally, and even if you have Wally, you also need to have one of your 4 copies of DDE in hand. That may mean that you have to play things like Energy Lotto in order to secure that, which isn't great. Like, you're diluting your deck with otherwise seen as bad cards, right, to try and get a big combo working. But it's still Item Lock. Item Lock is still inherently so good. It's so unhealthy for the game. It just ruins people. And, yeah, Item Lock is still Item Lock. And even though potentially a lot of the time it's a turn slower, it's still a little bit more damage than previous Quaking Punch, and Toad always found a way to make itself work, so I believe Noivern can do the same. It does then have the part Tina aspect with Loud Sonic. For a Psychic Dark colourless, we deal 120, and the opponent can't play any special energy cards from their hand during their next turn. So it's 1 energy less than Chaos Wheel, the trade-off being that it doesn't affect stadiums or tools, but special energy a lot of the time was why Giratina was so painful, I think. So it's the most important aspect of Giratina in the Loud Sonic attack. 120 as well, good amount of damage. You're now 2-shotting GXs, which is good. And of course you can just be doing distortions for a large portion. And then against certain decks that are DC reliant, think about the Vespiquen. Think about even Decidueye would really hate the special energy lock, especially because they play things like Vulpix. They may not mind the item lock too badly by the time it's rolled around to turns like 2 and 3, but the special energy lock could be really horrible for them, so that's pretty cool for you. And then it also has the GX attack, which I believe a lot of people underrate. I think is actually a really good GX attack. You do 50 to each of your opponent's Pokemon. This is actually, like, in my opinion, why I want to test this, even though I know that Guardy is bonkers. I want to test the Boom Burst out, because your win condition then becomes to spread and Espeon down the Guardy players. The idea being you can either early Wally, item lock them out of the game, or you can go for spread damage, flying flip, miraculous shine, KO everything, and I've still won. So I think this actually has the outs to Guardy, believe it or not. I think a lot of people write it off and just say, fairy weakness, this loses to Guardy. But I actually don't think it necessarily does. If you build the deck in the right way, The first time I actually built this deck, I tried to play Steam Seed's Bisharp to try and counter it, but then I figured out that Boom Burst is probably the smarter way to go when you play Coco and Miraculous Shine. And again, it's transferable, this combo. The Boom Burst could work against those Decidueyes, but then again, all of the attacks are good against Decidueye, and Item Lock is inherently great. But yeah, I think other important aspects are that this card has free retreat and 200 HP. So it's tanky, it can move between itself, it can combo with scoop ups, it can play hammers, it has space, even though it is just a stage 1. It doesn't quite have the amount of space as Toad, but it does still have space to play with, and for me, Item Lock is too strong to not be good. If I wasn't so worried about Guardy, I would actually rate this higher. I can see this card actually being 5-star play, eventually. Once we figure out how to make the Guardy matchup work. And I think it's actually workable. I think it's pretty workable. If you get your Boom Burst combo off, it's really good for you. Maybe Guardy has to start playing Mr. Mime now, just because it can't actually beat a Dragon deck. Who knows? Yeah, I'm actually a huge fan of Noivern. I think this card is crazy good, and everyone has written it off. And if you write off Item Lock and Special Energy Lock, you're just dumb, because these are such good locks. They're so powerful. Special Energy is so important in our meta, not only now, but throughout time, and so have item cards. Similar story. Even though people have been playing around Garb and are quote-unquote playing a lot less items right now, they're still so important. Ultra Ball is still like the card you want to see in your opening hand every single turn, every single game. You always want to have Ultra Ball. You always want to have VS Seeker. We still play like 15 item cards, and these are decks that are trying to play less items because of Garbodor. So, oh man, I'm still a huge fan of Noivern. I'm picking up 4 while they're cheap, while people still disrespect this card, because I think it's crazy good.
Yeah, the more I've thought about this card, the better I think it gets. Guardy, like we say, is the only inherent glaring weakness. Item Lock is insanely good. Special Energy Lock is insanely good. You're applying a lot of pressure whilst you're doing this. I'm just thinking about 60 cards in my head. And yeah, I'm definitely going to be giving this a go as well. I think, like we say, a lot of people have written this off. There's a couple of things in my mind that I'd like to see slightly different about the card. But I think in general, the card is really, really strong and not one to be slept on. Distortion will beetle you out of games. And hey, I played Zeb Striker back in the day.
Oh, yes.
It got me points once. So, you know, who says Noivern can't bring Zeb Striker back and do it all again? So yeah, for sure. I'm gonna, like, I agree. I'm gonna pick up 3 or 4 of this card for sure. While they're cheap, just because at least while DDE is in the format, I think this card has definitely a pretty high impact, pretty high potential.
Yeah, when DDE goes, it's rubbish, but yeah.
Next up, we have Porygon-Z, a Stage 2. Only 1 star, unfortunately. Format is the ability. It's why we're looking at this card. Once during your turn, when you play this card from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, devolve each of your opponent's evolved Pokemon and put the highest stage back into your opponent's hand. So it's Miraculous Shine on an ability. It's a coming into play ability, which is awkward, especially as it's on a Stage 2. But still, Miraculous Shine has seen play, so we have to look at this ability at least. Unfortunately, there's nothing to say really about this card. It's here because Miraculous Shine has been relevant over the past 2 months, but on a Stage 2, it's never gonna be the option that you pick over Espeon EX.
Yeah, exactly. Espeon's here for now, so we'll just use that instead. Even though you're wasting an attack for turn, I feel we have good enough spread attackers to be okay with wasting, quote-unquote, wasting a turn. Because if you're doing Miraculous Shine, it's because you're putting yourself in such an inherently strong position. Because you're ruining the opponent's side of the board. So, although Porygon-Z can be used on, you know, a cool turn and you're not having to attack, you can potentially be a turn quicker because you can Flying Flip on the turn that you do the format and knock out everything maybe a turn earlier. You're having to play a Stage 2, and that's just really bad for you. On to the items now. We start off with Rotom Dex Poker Finder mode. It is a terrible, 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 terrible card. You look at the top 4 cards of your deck, put them back on top of your deck in any order, and then shuffle your shuffle them back into your deck. Wait, what? Yeah, that is so terrible. It's like Premonition, but it's what? This does nothing for you. This card does nothing, and it's an item card, so you're giving Gardevoir 20 damage for the sake of doing like nothing. It's so bad for you that I don't even want to talk about it anymore. There is no application I see where this is good.
The only thing I like about the card is it's got a shot of the actual game in the card, so there's a little tie-in from the games and the TCG. But other than that, the card is useless.
Mm-hmm.
Next up, we have Super Scoop Up. This card is nuts. It's always seen play whilst it's been in format, and it will immediately see play. Golisopod loves it like outright, but Tapu Koko loves it outright. But anything that just tanks a hit is completely happy playing a Super Scoop Up, especially while I've got Forest down. Things grass types love it. Tapu Lele, reuse one to tag, the best ability in the game. Cool, let's do that. It's just insane. I really like, even though it's a 4-star card, I really feel like there's not much to talk about with this card, just because it's so insane. If you get that heads flip, it can literally be game changing. So it's just really, really strong.
Yeah, most people would have played when Super Scoop Up's been around, and it's annoying that games will be won and lost based on the flips of this card, but hey, it's something we have to live with now, and it's something that I'll be abusing because I've won a lot of tournaments thanks to Scoop Up. There we go. Next up we have Torment Spray. It's another terrible item. We've really got a couple of stinkers in this set. You choose one random card from your opponent's hand and have them reveal it, and then discard that card only if it's a supporter card. So the dream is you red card, you delinquent, and then you Torment Spray their supporter out of their hand to 0. That's the dream. In reality, it's a lot of combo to get going in the first place. You need to have all these cards in your hand without playing a supporter that turn, which is already awkward for you. And at the same time, they need to go down to a supporter card for them to go down to 0. And we, unfortunately, have Shaman, Lele, Rescue Stretcher, VS Seeker, Orangaroo. We have so many things in format, so many reasons why this combo doesn't work, and you're completely diluting your deck in a horrible way in order to try and hit a gimmick, in my opinion, which is just so poor for you. Even if you're playing like Sylveon, where you can grab this 3-card combo over and over again, I still wouldn't play the combo, I don't think, because it's still super situational. And it's random as well, so it's not like you can play cards that look at your opponent's hand and be like, maybe if you use Gumshoes and see that there's 3 supporters in their 3-card hand, you can be like, heh heh heh. But even then, like, it's not even good because they've got 2 more supporters in their hand, So, yeah, it's terrible.
Cards junk. Next. Muscular Dumbbells, a new tool for stage 1s. If the Pokemon this card is attached to a stage 1, it has plus 40 HP. I think in a format without Field Blower, this would be really, really important. Garbodors with 160 is a terrifying thought. A 1-prize attacker with a 160 HP that can one-shot everything is actually horrific. Same with things like Alolan Ninetales, like Noivern we've got here. That extra 40 HP is pretty disgusting, but we have Field Blower, so in the same way that Fury Belt hasn't seen much play until this past couple of weeks, this won't see play. The difference between this and Field Blower is this doesn't give you that bonus 10 damage, and I think this is why this never sees play compared to Choice Band, because you're literally giving up 30 damage for 40 more HP. The fact that Field Blower still is seeing play again is because it still at least does something on the turn you play it, whereas this, like in comparison to Choice Band and Fury Belt, Choice Band, you're always getting a lot of value the turn you play it because all of your value is based on your attack. Mm-hmm. Fury Belt, you're getting that extra 10 damage and that extra 40 HP, meaning you're not really cashing in too much, but you're still getting that little bit of a bonus. But Muscular Dumbbells is literally a dead card if your opponent is holding a Field Blower. So unfortunately, this card isn't going to see play. And luckily, the nightmares, not dreams, the nightmares of 160 HP Garbodors are at least not going to be too relevant at all.
Well, I think if it's anything, it's these two cards where Dumbbells ever does see play, because if you're forcing Field Blowers, Garbodor's kind of happy about that, and obviously they can't Field Blower a Noivern, so I think if ever it sees play, it's with these, but I agree that it's also very niche, and it's simply not choice banned, and we need choice banned for both of these cards, so yeah, I agree it won't see play. Next up we have a very glamorous 2-star card. A lot of people went absolutely berserk when this card was revealed, I remember. But then we do have Field Blower, and that is the saving grace here. Because if this card was able to stick in a format where there's no tool removal, this could be pretty crazy for a lot of decks. Whenever the Pokemon this card is attached to is your active and is damaged by an opponent's attack, even if it's knocked out, move up to 3 basic energy cards from that Pokemon to one of your bench Pokemon. So the card doesn't have to be knocked out in order to prop this effect. That's what's crazy. So it's like a Omega Hyper EXP share. It's crazy. Moving 3 basic energy from your active just onto another Pokemon instantly, it's like you wiped off all the damage. Every reason your opponent hit your active was because they're trying to target the attacker. And now you can just baton that all over to another target, and it's a real waste of a turn, and then you can go into your new attacker and just do shenanigans. Again, there's the big issue that it's not choice banned. This trade-off, it's 30 damage, but 30 damage is often so relevant for making knockouts happen. So there's nothing instantly where I think, man, I want to play Wishful Baton in this deck. And at the same time, if you're playing a deck that plays Wishful Baton, it won't be like a one-of. It's going to be a deck that has expensive 3 energy attack costs, which means the deck is really focused on it, and it would fear Field Blower. And unfortunately, Field Blower is an important, impactful card that is like a 2-of in a lot of decks, and sometimes even a 3-of in very ability-focused decks. So, yeah, Wish Baton, I believe, may see play very niche because its effect is so powerful, but I don't think it'll be a pulverizingly amazing card, even though the effect does seem pretty crazy.
Yeah, I think it's even though, like you say, the effect's crazy, but the card is mediocre just because of where it's placed in the format right now. Next up, we have Kiawe, a 3-star card, one of the first supporters we're going to be talking about today. And yeah, this card is incredibly strong in a vacuum. Search your deck for 4 fire energy cards, attach them to one of your Pokemon, shuffle your deck, your turn ends. In my mind, one of the only reasons this is only 3-star is actually because the attachment is locked to 4 energy to 1 Pokemon. So it means Volk, in my mind, doesn't appreciate it too much. Turtonator, however, does, because it means that you can Bright Flame and then attach a single more energy and Bright Flame again. That's really useful. And Tapu Lele, obviously, the more energy on it, the more damage you're going to be doing. Tapu Lele with 4 energy, plus a Choice Band is doing 110, which is a good baseline to be doing when your opponent's going to be attaching energy as well. So this could be a really cool one-off supporter for the early turns in these fire decks. I think where this will see play will actually be at some point in a deck that just wants to ramp colorless energy, and fire will be the colorless energy of choice. A deck that can run any energy, so will run DCEs plus fire and use Kiawe as the support. I don't see this fitting into Volk in my mind personally. After playing Volk a lot over the past couple of days, I don't think you really want to see this as your turn 1 supporter. You want to be getting energy into the discard and power heatering rather than just quickly attaching to 1 Volk. Because once that Volk goes down, you've got nothing to respond. You need to have 2 attackers in my mind with the deck. So I don't think Kiawe is too good in Volk, but I still think the card attaching getting 4 free attachments on your first turn, especially if you're going first so you can't attack anyway, is nuts. It's like how Tropical Beach, if you're going first, was always really good because you can't attack anyway, so sure, just draw 2 or 3 extra cards, start setting up for your next turn, that kind of thing. It's like your turn ends text could be completely irrelevant. But I don't think it's as insane as people first thought when they first saw this card.
Yeah, I agree. The sort of ins and outs of it are kind of a lot worse, even though it's just a silly amount of energy to dig out turn 1 5 energy on your board on turn 1 is just really crazy. That's like you using a Solgaleo, basically. And that reads your turn ends. So in that regard, it's like crazy good on terms of a power level. You do, however, pretty much have to do it on turn 1, otherwise your tempo is very slow. It can be consistent to be done on turn 1 because it's Tapu Lele. So you can just go ahead and find it. I don't think you ever play it as more than a one-off if you do play it in Volk. The actual thing I want to try out is the Quad Turtonator deck. If you just play 4 Turtonator, no Baby Volk, no Volk-GX, or maybe like only 1 or 2 Volk-GX to steam up your Bright Flame so you can KO bigger Stage 2 Pokemon. Because it's really good with Turtonator. Turtonator is by far the best target I believe we have for this guy. Doing the double Bright Flame, and then you can Nitro Tank on your 3rd turn. No, sorry, your 4th turn, because your turn 1 is Kiawe. On your 4th turn, you Nitro Tank and set up your final 2 prizes. It sounds like a deck that would be insane against other GX and EX decks, and terrible against non-EX decks. So I don't think Cord Turtle will ever be like a top tier archetype, but I think it could be the best solution for making Kiawe work. But this card has future potential for sure, just as more cards come out. Next up we have Plumeria. It's a pretty interesting supporter card we have. You have to discard 2 cards from your hand. If you do, you can discard an energy attached to one of your opponent's Pokemon. So it's the effect of Crushing Hammer flipping heads, and the payment for that is a supporter card, and you also have to pay 2 from your hand. There's a few decks that actually don't mind you paying 2. Things like Darkrai wouldn't mind it. Things like Marshadow style decks wouldn't mind it, and nor would Vespiquen decks, but I don't really feel like many of them would want to play this sort of style of effect. Maybe the Darkrai just to really stop your opponent having a backup attacker, because the reason why this is potentially played instead of Flagrant is because on the turn you take a knockout, you can also use the supporter to take an energy off the opponent's follow-up attacker. All the time there are these cards. Think about things like Dramper that has a 3 energy attack cost. And they'll attack with a Dramper, and they've got a Dramper on the bench with either a DCE or a basic energy on the bench. And they're basically saying, well, if this Dramper gets knocked out, I can still come in and Dramper next turn. Well, if you Plumeria on the turn that you KO their active, and you deal with their benched energy, it means they're pretty much left going, oh, that KO that I thought I had, I don't have anymore. I guess I'll just promote a Lele and try and like 2-shot you or something. So it really does ruin plans for certain decks. Dramper's actually one of the biggest examples of this. There are decks that aren't affected by Plumeria at all, but Dramper and other decks alike may be very heavily affected in decks in general. So Plumeria may find its way as a tech one-of just if you have bad matchups against these sorts of vulnerable attacking decks. Alternatively, it's just another supporter card that Disruption-style decks like Sylveon and Noivern can play. I think overall it's much more situational than Flagrant, so I think Flagrant will still be the higher count of Disruption supporter, but you probably play 1 Plumeria if you're going for the energy disruption route with either of these decks, in my opinion.
Yeah, completely agree. I'm going to be putting 1 Plumeria in any energy disruption deck, but it'll only ever be a 1 count because the discard could be painful. But that being said, guaranteed disruption, especially like you say on the bench, plus taking 2 prizes or taking 2 energy off the board in the active as well, can be game swinging. So definitely a niche supporter, but we'll probably see play just in these disruption decks either way. Next up we have our other 5-star card, Guzma. Yeah, we lose Lysander in the rotation, but who cares because we've got a better Lysander. It's essentially Lysander plus Olympia combined, minus the 30 heal. But the 30 heal was often pretty insignificant. You were using it as a way to have searchable switch rather than having to like find escape ropes, things like this, for having to pay retreat, all this kind of stuff. Plus you're getting the effect of Lysander in there as well. There's been so many times, especially for things like I say again, I've been playing Volk a lot lately. There's been so many times where I wanted Guzma because you retreat out, you Guzma out a Pokemon that you want to knock out. You go into a free retreater, and then you go back into your Volk that no longer has that effect of not being able to attack anymore, and you take another 2 prizes. Guzma is just a really, really strong card. In some decks, I think it's actually going to be better than Lysander because this switch is actually really, really relevant. I think some decks will stick at a one count, one Guzma, one Lysander. I would be very surprised if there's many decks that go strictly to Lysander now, because I think the switch is always going to be pretty relevant with things like Tapu Koko and Floatstone in format. Again, other things, Golisopod loves it because you're getting a free first impression again, provided you have some way of getting back into your Golisopod, meaning you only need one on the board, which is really, really cool. Things like the Decidueye and Ninetales, I think, again, it's just a really, really strong card to have. You're doing a lot of bench damage anyway. You're not necessarily hitting the active for a ton of damage, so why not hit the bench? Why not lock something active and hit the bench? Or why not finish something off that you've been setting up for a little while anyway? You're running Tapu Koko in these kind of decks anyway, so you're going to have that free retreat the majority of the time if you know you're going to be going down this route. So, yeah, I think in a lot of cases, Guzma is just strictly better than Lysander nowadays.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm more likely to put 2 Guzma in my deck than 2 Lysander. And we could even be seeing higher Guzma counts than we ever saw Lysander because of this extra switch effect. It does mean that we can also skimp out on cards in our deck. We no longer have to play Olympias. Like the one of Switch and Ropes that we played in some decks just for that extra switch option, we no longer have to play. So decks inherently like gain slots as well as keeping the Lysander effect, which is crazy good. Like Volcanion previously had to play 2 switch, 2 float minimum, and now they can probably get away with like just the 2 float and 3 Guzma. And how good is that for your late game? You've saved yourself slots so you can be more consistent now, and you have the same amount of switch cards potentially, but you're also like ending the game quicker, which is like crazy for you. And you can be end to 1 and be like, haha, I drew Guzma instead of that switch that I had in here previously. So many reasons why Guzma's incredible and as good and probably better than Lysander. And Lysander has been a card that has seen play like since it came out hugely. So there we go. Broken card. Next up we have Wick, far from a broken card. Each player shuffles their hand into their deck and draws a new hand of the same number of cards. As a disruption card, I believe this is rarely good, and it's hard for you to want to play a card that is an automatic -1 to yourself and keeping your opponent neutral. It just doesn't work. Why would you play a supporter to minus your hand? Like unless you're getting the disruption of like an N. Makes no sense. Card is really bad.
Yeah, I have nothing to say about Wick. There's been I think 2 situations in the hundreds of games I've played since this card was revealed that I've been, Wick could be better than N here, but I've still end and still hit the cards I need. So it's like, yeah, just play N. It's a worse N. Finally, we're onto the stadiums now, right?
No, it's Acerola time, boy.
Oh, Acerola! How did I forget? Acerola, 4-star card. Simply because it's a mix of, well, AZ was insane. AZ sees play in pretty much all expanded decks that can get away with it, and this is in my eyes a better AZ. Put one of your Pokemon with any damage counters on it back into your hand with all cards attached to it. That's the difference between Acerola and AZ. AZ discarded those cards, so sometimes you're a bit, I'm denying my opponent 2 prizes, but I'm losing DCE Muscle Band here. Nowadays, you're denying your opponent 2 prizes and keeping DCE Choice Band and dropping it all back down again and, hitting again. It's just so strong. It's strictly a better AZ in my mind, because a lot of the time AZ was used to deny prizes, and this is exactly what this card does. You've taken the hit, you're getting all your stuff back that you've spent all your time attaching, and then you can bench it all back down again. The only time AZ is better is if you're using it on things like bats and things like that. But I think a lot of the time Acerola is going to be the card that we see played over or as a one-off supporter in a lot of decks now. Things like Rainbow Energy and Magma Base means that you can even just attach a Rainbow Energy or bench something with Magma Base that you may want to use later on. It means you can pick up Lele's for free later on to be able to shuffle them back into your deck to deny your opponent to have another extra good out for N in the late game. And then in things like Golisopod, it's just going to be so strong being able to cycle this along with Scoop Up and Guzma. You can cycle Golisopod so much. It's insane. You're never hitting the same Pokemon twice. It's pretty much impossible. So yeah, the card is really, really strong. And potentially, I think this is one of the other cards that we were debating putting up to 5 stars, but unfortunately, it doesn't bring a whole archetype in itself. It's not going to be in every deck like Guzma will be after rotation. So it's probably only worthy of the 4 stars, but it's definitely a very, very strong card.
Yeah, I made the case for it being a 5. I really like the card. I think in things like Noivern and Golisopod, it will be more than a 1 count, and I think in a lot of other decks it will be that 1 count, because the healing effect is so great for you. Even things like Decidueye, Vileplume, this could be a huge tool. Maybe Decidueye Plume goes back to playing Rainbow Energies, because you can attach a Rainbow to your Vileplume, pick up with Acerola, and free yourself from item lock. That could potentially be a play that you go for. And by playing the Rainbows, you can play McGinn to protect yourself against Dramper as well. That's one of the reasons why people aren't happy playing Decidueye Plume. So yeah, potentially that's something to consider. But in general, Acerola, incredible card. I'm super happy to see this card come back, because I was very sad when AZ left, and this feels as good, if not better. Next up, we have Sophocles. He is a pretty mediocre supporter. Discard 2 from your hand, then draw 4. You can see the cards that would kind of appreciate discards. Ninetales for the Aqua Patches, Marshadow to attack with things, Darkrai gets himself into the discard pile, Vespiquen gets damage, but drawing 4 is terrible, and so is Sophocles.
Yeah, this needs to be more than draw 4 for this to be, a useful discard mechanic in my mind. So yeah, unfortunately, it could be so good for things like Marshadow Box and Darkrai and stuff like that, but you just don't. It's just not impactful enough discarding those 2 cards.
Maybe if you drew the 4 cards first, it would be much more of a decent card, because you could actually hit your combo pieces first. But when your hand is low, it doesn't help too much, and also you can't use it when your hand is really low. So terrible.
Yeah. Next up, we have Olivia, another supporter that's, again, pretty low impact. Search your deck for 2 Pokemon-GX, reveal them, put them into your hand, shuffle your deck afterwards. In a format where we have Bridget, I think a lot of the time Bridget is going to be better, because there's a lot of basic GXs that are really good right now. Obviously, this gets 2 Decidueye, things like that, 2 Alolan Ninetales. But, it's just... I think a lot of the time it's all about the early game rather than the late game. We have Ultra Balls for the late game, whereas early game you just need to spam these little mons to get into your late game pieces. So I think a lot of the time you want to be Bridgeting in your early turns and then Sycamoring into your 2 GX Pokemon, because you need to find an energy attachment as well, or you need to find a choice band as well. So yeah, in my mind, I think that's why Olivia just isn't good enough. We have Fan Club, we have Bridget. Having Olivia in format probably means it'll see play once every now and again in niche decks, but I don't think the card is insane at all. Plus we have Beacon as well. Beacon is strictly better because it's free, and you can get a GX and a non-GX, meaning that you're able to grab Dartrix Decidueye or Dartrix Alolan Ninetales, that kind of thing. It's just a lot more versatile.
Yeah, it seems to me that Olivia's outclassed in almost every way. If it's an evolution card, you're going to play Vulpix more than likely, and Bridget and Fan Club are better than Olivia for the early game, as you said. On to the stadiums now, Jack. We have Mount Lanakila. It is a very low impact card, I believe, in the format. The retreat cost of each basic Pokemon in play is 1 more. Very similar to Team Aqua's Secret Base. Obviously, Base is leaving soon, so this will be the quote-unquote replacement. But there's not really a deck that I can see this going in right now. There's a lot more evolutions in the format. There's Field Blower, there's counter stadiums everywhere. If it goes in anything, it's probably Sylveon to try and stall things, but stall has even got worse now that we've got Guzma, so I think the card will not see play ever.
Yeah, Sylveon hasn't taken off, so Mount Lanakila I don't think is particularly useful. Finally, we have Po-Town. A much more impactful stadium. Whenever a player plays a card from their hand to evolve a Pokemon, put 3 damage counters on that Pokemon. So this is the stadium I think of choice for the spread deck. I think because you're going to be getting 3 to 6 counters on Metagrosses, on Guardies, on not on Decidueyes, I guess, because they're going to forest you out of the game. But you're going to be getting these bonus 3 counters, and all of these counters are going to count in this kind of spread deck. Naturally works well with Miraculous Shine anyway because they're in evolution, so you're going to be devolving them. Cool. It's super nice for you. It's one less flying flip in some cases, things like that. Yeah, it's just a really, really cool stadium to have. I don't think it's insane enough to replace any current stadiums we have in format, but like even Drampagarb can use it once they lose Magma Base. Technically, it's just a cool stadium to have. I don't think it's insane. That's why it's only 3 stars, but it's a nice stadium to have, especially as we are moving towards a more evolution-based format.
Yeah, the card reminds me of Frozen City, actually, more than anything else, that you punish your opponent for trying to develop their board. Frozen City, put 2 counters on whenever your opponent attached to non-plasmas. This punishes when they start evolving up. Obviously, we do have Blower, we do have counter stadiums around, but when you can cash in on this damage, it's really going to help, because 230, 250, it's just such a high buff, and it's such a high increase that getting them back down to normal realms of HP, pushing them back into like 200 or 180 if they've double evolved up, and that's a number that pretty much every deck can hit. So Potown, I believe, will see a lot of play. I don't know if Drampagarb immediately puts it in over Magma Base. I've been debating this with myself today, and I think you probably do, because Drampagarb naturally doesn't have a great Guardian Metagross, so you play this over Magma Base, in my opinion, unless you're going for the Necrozma Espeon route to try and beat those matchups. So yeah, Potown I think is quite good.
Yeah.
So that wraps up all of our cards that we've discussed. We have put them into the ratings that you can see. Unfortunately, there's a lot of cards that are worth talking about, but not quite good enough to see play. Only a couple of the 5 stars, the Guardian, the Guzma, some nice 4 stars that I'm sure a few of you will argue that maybe like the Scoop Up, the Acerola, maybe even Golisopod, if that's your favourite card, maybe they will end up being even better. And there's also a few 3 stars which we feel worth definitely picking up for the binder and wait for the future, because they could burst out with potential, especially that Marshadow. I believe that could be pushing its way into a 5-star at one point in the game. So yeah, lots of different cards, lots of potential cards, and overall it's unrealistic to expect anything similar to our last set to happen again, because it was just the most incredible set that we had, and now that Guardians Rising is gone and done with, every other set is gonna be like, oh man, it's not as good as Guardians Rising. But it's like, well, no, because nothing ever will be, I don't think. That's like the most bonkers set, and this feels like a more realistic power level for the set. We do gain a new Badiff, bear that in mind. A new best deck in format has come from this set, and we also get a new, supporter, which is impeccably good. So the set is by no means garbage, and there's a lot of interesting cards, so I still feel it's definitely a set worth investing in.
Yeah, if I can kind of compare the Guardians Rising thing to Roaring Skies. Roaring Skies is an insane set. We got Mega Ray, we got all of this stuff, plus we got Shaman, and then AOR was just okay. It seems like a very mediocre set, but going over rotation, there's actually a lot of relevant cards in AOR. So whilst it seemed like a really irrelevant set compared to Roaring Skies, because we just got Shaman, I think there's going to be a lot of hidden gems in this set. And like you say, we're getting Guardy, which I think is, in mine and Joe's mind, a huge contender for best deck in format. I haven't tested it as much as Joe, so I can't outright say that from my perspective, but from what Joe's been telling me and from the games I have had with it, this deck is insane. So the set, whilst being compared to Guardians Rising and not having Tapu Lele, everyone's a bit, oh meh, it's okay. There's still a lot of hidden gems in this set, I think.
Alrighty everyone, if you're still with us, thanks so much for watching. Take a look at the bling here. This is some of the stuff you can be pulling in the set, so keep an eye out for them. But yeah, that is going to be it for the full set review, guys. We have been talking for a long time. I feel this is one of the longest ones we've done. So much to talk about, and we've left it quite late for set reviews, so we've just got a lot of information basically, and we've actually had time to sit down and play some of these cards, so we're even more opinionated than before.
That's the difference. We've had time to play with a couple of these decks now, and I think it's really improved in the way we've been able to talk about these decks. So yeah, I think it's definitely, whilst it may have been a little bit later than you guys would have wanted, there's still a lot of good information in the set review, and we've still got another couple of discussion videos to talk about based on this set and rotation and things like that over the next couple of days as well.
Yeah, we're going to be talking ourselves till we can't talk no more, basically. So please subscribe to the channel if you haven't, guys. We do all sorts of these discussions and also deck analysis for anyone just tuning in for this set review. I hope you enjoyed all the conversations that me and Jack were having. What do you think? What's your favourite card in the set? What's being slept on? What have we undersold? What have we said is too good? What's not going to see any play? What is something that maybe hasn't even been on this slideshow you think deserves some attention? Put it all down below. We love hearing these sorts of discussions. This is what the game is all about, and it also helps out the channel as well. So that's going to be it from us, guys. Until next time, it has been Jack and Joe from OmniPoke. And yeah, see you next.
See you later.